Once again, morning, everybody. Welcome to the Working with International Students workshop. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Maya Sarno. I serve as the Associate Director for Student Support at International Student and Scholar Services, ISSS. And on behalf of our team, I want to thank you again and again, especially those of you who are repeat attendees, for taking the time to participate in this workshop and discuss how we all work together to support international students at Rutgers. So just a little bit of housekeeping first. For one, you will hear from multiple members of our advising team throughout the workshop today. So stay throughout the workshop. We'll get to meet everybody. They'll all introduce themselves, explain a little bit about what they do and how they contribute to our team. I want to mention that the workshop is being recorded, and at the end, we will have this recording available on our global YouTube page. So if you want to share this with someone afterwards, or you want to go back and review something, the recording will be made available, and we will also share a PDF of this entire slide deck afterwards. So you don't need to furiously take screenshots or use your phone to take pictures. We will share the slide deck afterward. Throughout the workshop today, we're going to go over many different concepts, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end and some case study time for deep dive questions. But if you have quick questions that you would like answered throughout the workshop, please use the chat box and we will share links and respond to questions throughout. Also, if you haven't done so already, we would love to know which units are represented. Please adjust your name in the chat so you have your name and also the unit that you represent, just so we can see all the different folks that are here today in the various corners of campus that they come from. Also, I'm very excited to announce, and this is hot off the presses, this workshop has been accepted as a digital badge. So starting immediately, the workshop is now going to be a digital badge offering for our campus partners. And so if you stay throughout the workshop today, and if you fill the assessment out at the end, we will have a survey, of course, so we can know how we're doing. Once you complete the assessment and stay throughout the whole workshop, then we can award you the digital badge. And so it's a great thing to put on your LinkedIn, on your resume, and to build your digital badge collection with Rutgers. And so I'm very excited about that. So moving along to the workshop, what is this workshop? We view this workshop as an opportunity to connect with our campus partners, including faculty and administrators from across the university, and really learn from each other about what we all do to support and serve our international students. They are a unique population that we all help support. And we offer this workshop usually every semester as a way to underscore our commitment to student retention and positive outcomes. Some of you are repeat attendees. So again, thank you again for your ongoing collaboration. And for those of you who are first timers to the workshop, we extend a special welcome, and we look forward to introducing you to our office and our services. So here are some main points we're going to go over today. We're going to discuss the unique needs of international students and go over some introductory concepts and terminology related to international students and their F1 and J1 status. We don't expect you all to be experts on international student advising by any means by the end of this workshop, but we try to provide some background and context in terms of the regulatory compliance and how you might encounter these concepts throughout your work with international students. We're going to go over reporting requirements, maintaining legal status for students and what that means, and how we can all work together to make sure that our students are following the regulations and the law pertaining to their legal status. So throughout the workshop, we will invite discussion and conversation to explore how we can collaborate to better serve our international students. So again, if you have questions throughout, please ask it through the chat, and we will get back to it throughout. Or you can hang on to it until the break when we have time to address some questions. And we also will try to address the questions that were submitted in the registration ahead of time. All right, so now let's get started by seeing who is here today. I'm going to launch a poll. Can you all see this poll about who is here today? Tell me in the chat if you cannot see it. I might need to relaunch. Let's see, relaunch poll. There we go. Okay. So let's just get an idea of who we have here today. Just take a moment if you can to respond to the poll. We'd like to know how long you've been here and see how long you've been working with international students. Okay, give another few seconds. All right, got a nice mix here. I'm going to share this. Okay, so we really have a nice mix. It's almost like in, quarters as far as who's been here less than a year through who's been here for more than 10 years. So really nice mix of folks here today. That's awesome. All right, so again, welcome, and we really look forward to hearing folks' experiences and questions and learn from one another. So before we get into detail about our particular office, ISSS, I'd like to briefly let you know about the other units within Rutgers Global, because you may or may not be so familiar with the large umbrella that's Rutgers Global, under which ISSS falls. So International Student and Scholar Services, or ISSS, is our office, and our focus is both regulatory and supportive of the international student population. We provide a comprehensive orientation program, of which some of you participate. Thank you very much for your support throughout that program. We offer orientation at the start of the fall and the spring semesters, and we support students throughout their time at Rutgers and also actually beyond. So we serve students through our advising services. Also, the International Academic Success Office has recently become a part of ISSS, and they coordinate the Are You Fit program. So if you're familiar with Are You Fit, that's coordinated out of International Academic Success, out of our office. International Academic Success also partners and coordinates the pre-departure orientation, or we call it the PDO program, in which representatives from Rutgers, various units, academic and ISSS, travel together to China or India in June and conduct events for incoming students and their families. ISSS is located at 180 College Avenue, and you're welcome to visit our office on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday. Our physical office and advising services are closed on Wednesdays so that we can host events such as this, so that we can catch up on meetings and processing student requests and hold other events. But otherwise, we're open Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. So moving on to other Rutgers Global units, the Study Abroad unit also falls under Rutgers Global, and along with traditional study abroad opportunities, their offerings have actually expanded to include service learning, internships, volunteer opportunities, and global learning for all. Then we have the GPSI unit, Global Partnerships and Strategic Initiatives. GPSI includes all these different programs that also help support university-wide cultural and academic programs for students. The International Partnerships Office develops agreements and builds relationships with universities worldwide and coordinates visits from international delegations. Specifically, we currently have staff in the Partnership Office in China and Latin America. Then we have the Office of the Vice President, which oversees strategic planning for all of Rutgers Global. This is also the office that handles centralized marketing and communications, as well as data analytics and outreach. So more information about any of the Rutgers Global units can be found at global.rutgers.edu. So now at this point, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Elizabeth Schauer. Elizabeth, take it away.
Thank you so much, Maya. My name is Elizabeth Schauer. I serve as Assistant Director for Administration and Special Projects within ISSS. I'm focused on ISSS operations, process improvement, and also our assessment. I joined the team, both Rutgers and ISSS, in July. And a fun fact about me, you'll see some fun facts throughout, is that I am a knitter. Here's a snapshot of our current organizational structure. ISSS is roughly divided into student services and faculty and scholar services. Mohini Mukherjee leads our student services team, which includes advising staff, international academic support, central academics administration staff, compliance, and health insurance. I'd also like to point out that in addition to our degree-seeking student advisors on our student services team, we also have Carissa McCarthy, who you will hear from next, who takes care of our non-degree, short-term students, and student interns. So she will be able to help you if you are looking to bring a student on campus who is not looking to pursue a degree at Rutgers. Carissa is the sponsored student advisor and works with Fulbright students and scholars after their arrival to campus, and she also provides support to other special student populations. Throughout this morning, you will have the opportunity to put faces with many names from this list, as several members of the ISSS staff will present portions of the workshop. Now I'd like to introduce our office and what we do. The core role of our office is to provide immigration advice to our F1 and J1 international students. We assist students in maintaining their legal status, and we'll go over more about what that means later. And we help them to comply and follow federal regulations to keep the institution approved for hosting international students. In terms of student advising, as Maya shared a little bit about already, we host virtual appointments daily, except on Wednesdays when we're closed for processing, and in-person advising by appointment only. We also advise through our virtual off-campus employment chat sessions, remote quick question advising, or QQA for short, in-person workshops, and our front office staff can answer quick questions over the phone. Finally, all of our required workshops have been moved online, so your students can now review the workshops through their Our Global portal at their own pace and refer back to them as well. We pride and view ourselves as a holistic international services office, so in addition to advising, we also provide programming for international students and scholars. Our next slide, I'll be able to show you some of those graphics for exciting programs we've had in the last semester or so. Our largest program is the mandatory International Student Orientation Program at the start of each fall and spring. Our orientation program includes pre-orientation virtual components, followed by a robust in-person program that runs for 3 days in August and 1 full day in January. And the program typically receives excellent feedback from students. The Rutgers Global Programs Office helps with our orientation program, and they also create various in-person and virtual programming throughout the year. As many of you know, our advisors serve as liaisons for academic departments, so they are the main point of contact for each department. And it's so wonderful to see so many departments represented in the chat and changing your names, so thank you. To see who the liaison for your department is, you can check the list on our website or refer to the workbook that was shared with you in the email earlier this week. If you missed the email, we can share the workbook again in a follow-up message after today's workshop. Finally, international students have many deadlines and rules that we try to keep on their radar, and we do this through automated emails, website updates, monthly notices, and more. We're also committed to providing clear communication to you, our campus partners, and we aim to keep you informed of major policy updates that can affect international students. We all know Rutgers is a big place, and with your support, we can help our students navigate and identify all of the resources they need to succeed. And as I mentioned, here's a subset of some of our programs and services that we're excited to be able to offer to students. Of course, we're one of just many offices that work with our international students at Rutgers, and our work cannot be completed without the collaboration of you, our campus partners. While we provide immigration advising and programs, we cannot be all things to all of our students. We absolutely need the cashier's office to handle student accounting and the academic departments to advise on course requirements. We refer students to the Dean of Students office, or CAPS, when needed, as well as many other offices. Because of this, we're committed to making concerted efforts to continue to build relationships and work together with other academic and non-academic units to improve the international student experience as a whole. Here's a snapshot of our international student statistics for the fall 2024 semester. As you can see, we experienced a steady increase over the last several years, and then there was a decline that started in 2020 to 2021. Specifically, undergraduate student enrollment went down in 2020, and while there was also a dip in grad enrollment and slow growth of some programs, all of this was consistent with national trends. However, now we're seeing the numbers rebound. This fall, we were thrilled to welcome more than 1,400 new incoming students. Increasing international student enrollment is one of enrollment management's priorities for the next few years. So our office is quite busy serving a growing population and making necessary preparations for even greater numbers next year. Regardless of whether enrollment numbers are up or down, we are confident that Rutgers has continued to assure our international population that they are welcome here, and we do our best to help them have the most positive experience possible. I know that many of you have been actively involved in making accommodations for international students over these last few years. Our efforts to support them are important for retention, and they impact future enrollment as well. At ISSS, we worked hard to support international students both near and far throughout the pandemic, which was an extremely complicated time for international students. As they have started returning to campus in greater numbers, we continue to take real pride in the many ways we've been able to connect with our students and serve their needs. So with that, I'm going to pass this off to my colleague, Carissa.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carissa McCarthy, and I'm the Assistant Director for Student Engagement and Special Populations. I've been in Rutgers for 18 years now, so I've worked with all sorts of students, but right now I'm focused on more of the special populations. And I do work with Fulbright and sponsored students, as mentioned, and the study abroad students. So kind of the special, unique areas. And it's really, I love the work. It's kind of why I'm here. So thank you for joining all of us. And I am also an identical twin. So that's my fun fact. Okay. So I have the fun opportunity to introduce a short video for everyone. And I hope you will enjoy it. It is, I think, something that everyone should appreciate, even if you are a native speaker. So whether you're a native speaker or English is your second language, we're going to take a little mini English class. So. We're not hearing the audio, so I don't know if, hang on one second. We tested this. Let's see. Okay. Well, I can explain the video really. I mean, you'll have to watch it and I'll send it out if we have a hard time sharing it. But it's this person that's on Instagram, and he goes through different words and explains how specific words can sound the same. Do you want to try again?
So this word is ove, which means this word is loathe. No, it's love. Why would you think? It's because it's not loathe. That's why. Okay? So obviously this word would be, so it'd be clove. No, it's clove. You know, it's because it's love with a C. Clove. That's why. Which means this word would be glove. No, it's glove. You know, let me try to explain it better. Okay. This word is love, which means this word is love. No. Why would you think? I mean, mauve? No. It's move. You know, it's because it's not the same. That's why.
Yeah, Bill, thank you for appreciating this. I love this. I think it's super funny. That's why it's not the same. So, I thought it's fun to to get into the mental space a little bit about how we learn languages. So we learn languages through a set of rules and expectations, and there are exceptions clearly to these rules. But similar to culture, as we're adapting to a different culture, you're expecting specific rules to happen, and there are certain exceptions, and you have to go through that adaptation process. So having this awareness, I think, of having an idea of how difficult English can be, whether you are a native speaker or not, but just adapting to that different cultural norms or expectations is something our students obviously go through a lot through, and it can really provide us some insight on what they go through when they're arriving, but even throughout their journey. And it can really, hopefully, allow us a greater empathy and compassion for them. And while they're experiencing their journey, we can think of really how things are not always as they expect. And for anyone that's joined Rutgers, I will say that has not known Rutgers before, we live in a bunch of acronyms, so that alone is a different language to learn. And I think that it's really important as we're helping our international students to really assist them on this journey, making it the best possible one for them, having that student success being forefront in our minds, and that is being inclusive and empathetic towards their journey and kind of all the little adjustments that are happening on a daily basis, whether it's language or it's culture or being even a part of Rutgers as a new set of norms that they're looking to explore and adapt to. So we can now talk a little bit about the journey. So we've given you a little introduction about our office and how we support our international students here, but we want to give you a deeper dive into the international student experience and give you an idea of who our students are and what it's like for them to study in the U.S. And depending on your role, you may or may not know much about this journey and that students embark on while they're pursuing their education at Rutgers, but we want to give you some insights and break down the international journey itself. So, like all students, when they first apply to Rutgers, most of them are admitted and they're issued an I-20 or DS 2019, and that comes from our admissions office. So an I-20 or DS 2019 are immigration documents, and we show you more of examples of this in the upcoming slides. But students then take this document along with some other material with their acceptance email and so forth, their bank account, funding documents, and they then apply for a visa at the embassy or the consulate, U.S. embassy or consulate. And once they arrive to the U.S. must maintain, the student, must maintain their status. And we'll talk a little bit about what it means to maintain their status. Often in their journey, they want to apply for different benefits like working on campus or off campus. And at the end of the degree, they do have these options to apply for these specific employment options. They can also transfer to a different school or maybe return home. So we'll talk about all these options post-graduation in a later bit. But I just want to explain a little bit who our international students are. So we can see, really, when we talk about this term international students and what visas that they're on, it seems straightforward, but an international student is a foreign national studying in the United States. And while it's true that our office advises specific international students in F1 and J1 status, some of our international students identify themselves as international students, but they might actually not be in either of those statuses. So they might be a permanent resident, or maybe they're a spouse of a student that's studying here, or a child from a person who's working on a working visa. So all these are different examples, and we may have some interactions with them in our office, but the majority of our students self-identify in terms of the international population is F1 or in F1 or J1 status. And most international students are here in an F1 status. So the purpose and intention of an individual who's coming to the U.S. in F1 status is for full-time study. You may have heard of me refer to the Form I-20. So this is the certificate of eligibility. It's a document that they're going to use, and it's generated for an international student after being admitted into the university. And generally, as I mentioned, our I-20s are created by the admissions office. And then if there's any updates or needs, any changes that need to happen on the I-20, it's made by our office. And a benefit, as I mentioned, that international students have is to work on campus at Rutgers. And there are very specific circumstances in which they can work possibly off campus through what's called a curricular practical training, or CPT, or optional practical training known as OPT. And we'll talk about that a little more later. There's also J1 status. So individuals that are entering the U.S. on J1 status are known as exchange visitors, and they differ from F1 students in that there's many different categories of J1 exchange visitors. For any of you that maybe work with some of the scholars in our office or faculty, we do have many faculty or scholars here in maybe a research scholar category. So there's also a J1 student category, which is what we are designated to work with. And the J1 certification is known as the DS 2019. So our J1 students are subject to a little different regulations than F1 students, specifically regarding on-campus employment and off-campus employment. And also for short-term non-degree students I work with, that's also a bit different. So, but I can advise Jay. I've advised Jay's many years, and also many of our other advisors are also learning and can be trained to work with J1 students as well. So you may be wondering what the difference between F1 and J1 students are. And one of the main differences is that where the source of funding is coming from. So F1 students generally are self-funded, and they're funded from their family or maybe from Rutgers. But for J1 students, they're typically funded either from a third party like Fulbright or their home government, or in some cases it could be Rutgers. But the spirit of the J1 visa is different because it's really to foster cultural exchange and engage the student in cross-cultural learning. That's why they're called exchange visitors. So that's a little different than the F1 visa. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about CVIS. So the I-20 and the DS-2019 are generated from a database known as CVIS. And I just thought I'd briefly go over this to give you a little idea of the system that we work with. So CVIS stands for Student Exchange Visitor Information System, and it's a database that's owned by the U.S. government, maintained by the school. So because our office has many student records to maintain, we also have an in-house database known as ISSS, and that helps us keep track of the records. And this information through Rutgers has a data warehouse that goes through ISSS, and then we send information and reporting requirements into CVIS. So on the right side of the slide, you can see all the CVIS reporting information that we are required to report. So we must report information to CVIS, like their program, students' program information, address, phone number, any email updates. And the My Rutgers system also helps us generate that information. And we also have to report any employment information, or if they're adding a dependent, or any time they're less than full-time, or they've requested a less than full-time enrollment. So that's just a quick overview. And let's have a quick pop quiz for everyone who's been kind of listening. We will start a quiz. Can everyone see that? Poll, I should say. Okay. So international students, quick question. Do they need, true or false, they need a visa during their entire stay in the US? What do we think? We have some answers, and I will share them in a minute. Can anyone see the poll yet or no? I'm not seeing a button to share the poll.
The answers are coming in.
They are, okay. So this is not, it's true or false, so, okay. All right, a mixed bag then. Okay, I'll end the poll now, but I think it's definitely good effort, A for effort, everyone. The answer is false. They do not need to have a visa during their entire stay in the US, and I will explain why. So that is, we have a mixed view on that. So that's good. That means that we can learn something a little more. So I'll explain this why that is. So an I-20 and the DS-119, you'll see them on the screen. As I mentioned before, they're the certificate of eligibility for an F1 student or J1 student. And they receive this document, as we said, from Rutgers after they've shown proof of their funding and they've been admitted. So this document is known as their status document. And the document has all the information that we need, which is personal information, program information, level of study, all the different details, the program start date and end date, on this document, and this document cannot expire when students are pursuing their program at Rutgers. So let's talk a little more about visa versus status. So you've heard F1 status, J1 status, and you may know of the visa stamp. That's the entry stamp in their passport, and that's used when they legally enter the US. So these terms, visa and status, go hand in hand, but they're not the same thing. So it's true that an F1 student would need to enter the country on an F1 visa, which is the stamp in their passport, and that's granted by the embassy or the consulate overseas. But it allows a student to legally enter the US. And that visa stamp reflects the non-immigrant status that the visa holder will be on when they enter. So the visa is like the key to enter the house, if the US is the house, and the visa holder can only enter the house if the visa is valid and not expired. So once they've entered the US and used that key, so to speak, their status begins, and then they must maintain their legal status using their status document, their I-20 DS-119, to make sure that they're keeping everything up to date and it's not expiring. So this is a document that should not expire. Their visa can expire while they are here and they've entered. Okay, we can go on. The visa here's an example of the visa, and you can see that the visa type is indicated in the right side on the red circle. So inside the yellow box, you can see that there's an expiration date. To Carissa's question, how long the visas are, the status form, so it's DS-119 I-20, that is depending on the program, but the visa itself could vary. We could have some students that get a visa for a year, some students that get it for 5 years. But the main point to remember is that students need to enter the US while it's valid, and if the visa expires, then while they're inside the US, it's not a problem as long as the student is currently maintaining their status as an F1 student. And they can only renew this visa if they're outside the US at the consulate or embassy. And it's important to note that just because someone was issued a visa does not guarantee that they're permitted to enter the US or that they will maintain their status during their visit. So students meet with port of entry officers, and they will ask some questions, and then it's at their discretion to see if the student is permissible to enter the US or not. So although some students enter on F1 visa, you may note that they move on to different visa categories, possibly when they're in the US, and they do that sometimes without even traveling or re-entering on the new visa. Okay. Let's talk about the I-94. So similar to the visa stamp and legal status, you may have heard of this I-94. The I-94 is an entry and departure record, and that's issued by the Customs and Border Protection unit. It states how long the visa holder may stay in the US and proves that they've entered the US, entered the country legally. So on this example, the F1 student on the I-94, you can see that the F1 status is noted under the class of admission. The admit date is noted as D/S. That means it seems unusual because one of the few visa categories, F1 and J1, have this option, but DS means duration of status. So that means that when the student's permitted, they're able to stay in the US as long as they're maintaining their legal status for the duration of status. So for an example, an undergraduate student might decide to go on to grad school. If a student may continue their F1 status, they may continue it without a break from one program to another for the duration of status, as long as they're doing that and they're maintaining their record and updating their document without leaving the US. Okay. So we just want to highlight some of the government agencies we do work with and we act as a liaison for helping our students. So each of these government agencies serve a particular purpose in their role in ensuring students are abiding by the laws and focused on their purpose to be a student here. And more on a local level, the Social Security Administration Office. Some students, we work closely with them, where some students might be eligible for an SSN if they have a job offer. And they also may visit the New Jersey Department of Motor Vehicles, to apply for, say, a driver's license of some sort. So the point for the variety of agencies is that they do monitor some of the activities of the students and their educational program, like Rutgers. So we need to provide them accurate information and data so that we can be in compliance, and of course continue to host international students at Rutgers. And then they also use some of this information to double check and confirm that the student's eligible for some of their benefits. So with your help and partnership, we can definitely support our students, help them make sure that they're complying with the regulations, and helping these offices also regulate what they need to do. And I'm going to mention a little bit about our ISO. So Elizabeth talked a little bit about this, which is our International Student Orientation Program, but it really is a great resource for our students. And as we mentioned, it happens each fall and spring. It includes a lot of legal sessions from our team, as well as informational sessions about our partners, and of course, opportunities for students to socialize. So our ISO program gets a lot of positive reviews from students, but it's appreciated when you also support our students in going, and we can coordinate any conflicts if there are any with your orientations. But we know it makes a really huge difference with students' adjustment and in their process when they're coming to the U.S. So we do talk about a lot of these challenges that students might face as soon as they arrive to the U.S., and that's important. Okay. Scams and frauds. So unfortunately, some of our newly arrived students have been targeted with some of these fraudulent scams. And I'll also quickly mention that some of our students, even prior to arriving, have fell victim to some of these scams, even with housing. So if they are looking for a housing or room, as we know, there's many scams out there. So unfortunately, they do tend to prey upon our international students, and sometimes they pose as government officials or they're interested employers, and they have a very sophisticated method of masking their identity to students with their phone number, and they really sound very legitimate. They use they scare and use scare tactics. It's quite scary. So they take advantage of our students, which is really sad. And they have demanded money, and also in the form of gift cards. They tell students if they fail to comply with some of their requests that they're going to result in deportation and lots of negative consequences. So we do our best to warn students about this prior to them coming with our ISO and our email notices, the website, and so forth. We also partner with RUPD and other ways to help raise awareness about these scams and the fraud targeting our international students. But if you do ever hear of a student that's been a victim of scam, please feel free to tell our office and direct them to us, because we do advise them on next steps in terms of reporting the incident, and we remind them how to kind of protect themselves from these scams. It's very unfortunate. We've had students lose hundreds of thousands of dollars, so it is very real, and we would really appreciate any partnership or reminders that you can to share that information with our students, because we don't want anyone to fall victim of this. So, but I'm going to pass this on to now Andrew. He's going to talk a little bit about more maintaining legal status and what students need to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Carissa. Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Bautista. I am one of the international student advisors here at Rutgers Global. As mentioned earlier, advisors liaise for specific departments here on campus. In particular, for myself, I liaise for the undergrad students. I am one half of the SAS liaison advisors with Steph. I'm very happy to see familiar names from SAS. Thank you for being here. For the grad programs, I liaise for the computer science, food science, nutritional sciences, graduate school of education, anthropology, to name a few. I facilitate CPT OPT workshops for our international students. The second one this semester will actually be tomorrow at the academic building. We do have a flyer about it, I think, in the next few slides, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few. A fun fact about me, I was an international student on F1 status actually, more than a decade ago. I came to Rutgers, I started my career as an international student advisor at Rutgers Newark in 2020. I moved to a different institution and then I sort of returned to Rutgers, but to New Brunswick this time in 2022. So I will be talking about maintaining legal status for international students. While students are here on a student visa, their main objective is to study and pursue their degree. Maintaining their legal status is the student's responsibility. Here's some guidance in terms of maintaining their legal status. The student must check in with ISSS upon arrival to the United States by completing the check-in e-form in the R Global portal. They must have health insurance coverage at all times. Their passport must be valid at all times. They must maintain and update their address, email, and phone number through their My Rutgers portal. As mentioned before, the DS 2019 and I-20 cannot expire while they are enrolled in their academic programs, and any changes in these in terms of their degree level or program of study must be updated in the government database. They should also obtain travel signatures before any international travel. J1 students, So J1 students have an additional obligation to report serious incidents to us, such as losing their passport or being the victim of a crime. We are then required to submit incident reports to the Office of Private Sector Exchange Administration. Both F1 and J1 students have hourly limitations for on-campus employment, which we will discuss in a bit. And international students are responsible for filing their taxes and required tax forms each year. Last but certainly not the least, they must be pursuing a full course of study, which can include no more than 3 credits of online coursework toward their full-time course load. So what is study? A full course of study means 12 credits for undergrads and 9 credits for grad students. During the pandemic, ICE had temporarily allowed international students to enroll in any combination of online, in-person, and hybrid classes. However, ICE reverted back to pre-pandemic regulations effective fall 2024, and students are again limited to taking only 3 online credits toward their full-time enrollment requirement. Hybrid classes are acceptable as in-person classes, and students should always be making normal progress toward their degree. This is true for both F and J students. In a student's last semester, if only one course is required, that course must be in person. Concurrent enrollment is allowed with proper reporting to our office. By this, we mean students cannot delay graduation for non-essential academic reasons. Let's go to our next slide. Reduced course load. Now, there are very specific exceptions to the full course of study. If a student meets one of these exceptions, they can apply for reduced course load by submitting a request in the R Global portal. Before our office receives the request for the student, the request must be reviewed and approved by either an academic dean, a graduate program director, or registrar for Rutgers Health students. RCL, that's what we call reduced course loads when we talk with students. RCLs are ultimately reviewed and approved or denied by international student advisors. Please note that enrolling in less than full time without permission from our office is grounds for SEVIS termination. Therefore, RCL requests, including academic reasons and medical reasons, must be reviewed and approved by ISSS before a student drops below full-time requirement. A student's record must be updated if there are any changes to the current information listed. For example, a student changes their degree level or if they need an extension for their I-20, that must be reported to us. Some of these forms will need academic approval. The forms listed in boldface on this slide are just some of examples of changes that require ISSS staff to update a student's record. This allows our office to obtain accurate information directly from the school about the specific application the student is submitting to our office. And now I'll turn it over to Steph.
Hi, everyone. My name is Steph Acuna. I'm a senior international student advisor here at Rutgers Global. I see some familiar names in the chat, so welcome. Good to see you again. I am the liaison, the second part of the liaison to undergrads in SAS. I also work very closely with MBS, SMLR, Global Sports Business, and a handful of the SEBS programs. So thanks for being here today. I am considered an employment specialist in the office, and I also have participated in pre-departure orientation, PDO. I work closely with athletics and career exploration and success in particular, which I enjoy greatly, all those partnerships. And I've been at Rutgers since 2012 as a student first, and then I did my undergrad, I've done my master's here, and I've been a staff here for some time. And thank you very much for the congratulations in the chat. I appreciate that a lot for my CES colleagues and those that were at the breakfast last week. Thank you. And a fun fact about me is that I love live sports and music. And I'm going to be talking to you about employment, one of my favorite topics. So as you can see on this slide here, when it comes to international students, we think of employment as any service or activity normally performed in exchange for some type of compensation. It's a broad definition there. So common examples of off-campus employment include internships, co-ops, and we often get questions about whether volunteer work or conference reimbursements can count as off-campus employment. The short answer is it depends. So when in doubt, please feel free to always direct the students to our office to talk to an advisor, or you can connect with us directly because there are gray areas of this topic of employment. This subject is truly broad enough to necessitate a full workshop that students are required to attend, but today we're just going to be going over the very basics of off-campus employment and on-campus employment too. So, can international students work? The answer is yes, but as been alluded to previously, there are specific regulations about employment that students must follow depending on their visa and status type. So let's go over those types of employment that are open to the international students that our office supports, the F and the Js. We can't speak for other visa types during this call today, like H's and L's. We are going to focus on F and J's. That is the types that we are able to advise on. So international students in either F or J1 status are eligible for on-campus employment, as well as off-campus employment. However, there are certain requirements and procedures for each type to participate. So first, for our F or our J visas, they engaging in on-campus employment. Examples include the locations you see listed on the slide here. Work on campus can be up to 20 hours per week during the semester. So during our spring and our fall semesters, it could be up to 20 hours per week. And for more than 20 hours a week during official school breaks, such as winter break and summer break. The 20-hour limit is for all on-campus roles combined. So it's a total of 20 hours maximum in all of your roles. So if a student works at the Rutgers Recreation Center and also works in your office at your department, they cannot go beyond 20 hours per week in both of those jobs combined. So they may need to adjust their hours to not go beyond that federal limit. Also, enrolling part-time during the term does not make a student eligible for more on-campus working hours. So for our PhD students that are all but dissertation, maybe they're only enrolled in one research credit each semester in the fall and the spring, that does not make them eligible to then work full-time on campus during the fall and the spring semesters. They're still limited to just 20 hours a week total. As the name suggests, these jobs take place physically on campus, but F1 students are authorized to work on campus until they complete their programs. So that's why the I-20 is so important, to make sure that their status is valid through the end of their current program. So that's why we look to them to make sure they're maintaining their status, and their DS 2019 or I-20 is valid throughout that time. J1 students in particular must go through additional authorization from their sponsors, like if it's Fulbright or something like that. And their on-campus authorization ends either when they complete their degree requirements or after 12 months, whichever comes first. They would need to renew their approval with their office for each employer, and at the end of that period, if they're continuing to work or continuing to study. So there's just an additional step there. Now, for off-campus employment, F1 students who wish to work off-campus are required to request prior authorization for practical training. That's the PT that you hear a lot in CPT and OPT. Practical training is employment authorization that allows students to work off-campus for the purpose of gaining experience or additional knowledge in their field of study, aka their major, or for undergrads, majors sometimes. Curricular practical training, or CPT, can be granted as long as the employment opportunity is an integral part of the student's curriculum and the student is enrolled in the proper CPT course. Common examples of that include the SAS internship, School of Engineering co-op course. RICC has a course as well for their internship and program. So CPT is authorized by our office with prior approval from the academic officials. There's no application fee for CPT. Aside from the student enrolling in the right course that they need to, that's affiliated with the CPT opportunity. And we generally review and approve the CPT request within just a few business days. So work can only begin after our office makes a CPT I-20. In most cases, only part-time CPT is allowed during the semester. Again, referring to fall and spring. So a note about long distance CPT here, that's CPT that takes place further than a commutable distance from Rutgers. As Andrew was mentioning before about the limit of online classes, this is because students are expected by the government to maintain an in-person presence on campus during the fall and the spring terms. Students should always consult with our office and ISA for opportunities that take place far from campus because we can advise them on if it makes sense for them, the potential risk that might exist if they are pursuing that, and help them explore their options because it does depend a lot on the time of the year, if it's during the semester or during an official school break session. On the other hand, optional practical training, or OPT, requires students to file an application with USCIS, which is a government agency Carissa talked about before. So OPT is a benefit available to F1 students, and with any type of OPT, again, the work must be directly related to their field of study and appropriate for their degree level, the level of education. So the application for OPT is currently $470 that's paid to the government, and students can either apply for pre-completion before graduating, post-completion after completing coursework or their entire degree requirements, or the STEM OPT extension. So while international students are enrolled in their programs, they may apply for pre-completion OPT, but CPT tends to be preferable since it's quicker for students to apply for. And our office is the one that's doing that authorization versus pre-completion OPT is being processed by USCIS, so the federal government. If a student, after a student completes their academic programs, then they can work on OPT, post-completion, for up to 12 months. If a student is eligible for STEM extension because they majored in a STEM eligible program, they could then possibly apply for the additional 24 months of employment authorization through a STEM OPT extension, giving them a total of 3 years to work based on the degree they just completed. So in this case, again, work can only begin once it's approved by USCIS. For CPT, they have to wait for us to authorize it and be approved. For OPT, they have to wait for USCIS to do the approval. And please note that some students work at Rutgers while on OPT, if the role allows this type of work authorization and if the role directly relates to their major. So if a student's applying for OPT or STEM OPT, they must be inside the US at the time of filing that application to the government. And there are very specific timelines to apply for OPT. Wait times can also vary as well, depending on how quickly the government's processing things. We have several online workshops and chat sessions about employment just for this topic that students are able to attend. And for the ones that we have on our global portal, which we'll talk about soon, they can do those on their own time. There are quizzes to make sure that they understand what they have learned to test their knowledge. And some of these workshops include the on-campus employment workshop, off-campus employment, and post-completion OPT. So we did bring back those in-person workshops, which I'll plug in just a minute here, because students like to connect with us in person and helps them really understand the information about their off-campus options. And finally, speaking about J1 students, academic training. J1 students can only engage in off-campus employment through academic training. So just a different name there. We call that AT. So similar to OPT for F1 students, academic training for J1 students allows them to work off campus for the purpose of gaining experience or additional knowledge in their field of study. It all relates back to their main program, that it's related to that. It's authorized by our office though, and it's for specific jobs with specific starts and end dates. And students can do academic training either during their program, so while they're still studying, or after they've graduated. Since J1 students are exchange visitors, their training is meant to be primarily in person in order to for students to have that exchange and to uphold the spirit of the J1 visa category. We use that a lot, the spirit. What is the purpose of this category? So we do have a small J1 student population, but it is important to note that every process for AT is very different from OPT, and the timelines are also different. So this is just a glimpse of what students and employers need to provide for the AT application. So these applications are evaluated internally within our office. They do not have a separate USCIS application, unlike OPT. And J1 students must have a job offer at the time they apply for this, at the time they graduate and apply. So that's a bit different from OPT. So it's important for students to note that their timelines are different from their F1 students and their peers. There are many intricacies to AT, and the J1 regulations can be a bit vague. So it's always best to reach out to us if your student has a question. And Carissa and I are typically the ones that are handling many of those J1 questions, although anyone in our office is able to help guide you. So please feel free to reach out to us and point your students to Carissa and I. And I do want to plug that event. This is what I was talking about before. We did put the link in the chat before if you want to share with your students, but this is tomorrow. As you can see, it's a 2-hour session we're having on College Ave in the academic building that Andrew will be leading along with a few other of our ISAs. It's a wonderful time for students to meet each other and to hear what the questions, they share about CPT and OPT. So we're really excited for that and looking forward to giving that presentation. Okay, so onboarding for an F1 or J1 student. This is a general overview of the onboarding process and what documents you'll need to collect from the student to enter them into the HCM or payroll system. And I know that there are some departments or units where a specific staff person usually only handles this, while other staff members maybe help onboard faculty and scholars. So it might be a difference between student or faculty and scholar onboarding. So although this progression looks easy, we know that there can be various issues with the student's information, like not going through E-Verify or one of the other systems. And also there might be a situation where you need to reach out to your HR contact for more information or guidance if you have questions on how to onboard either an F or a J student, or even another visa type, such as like J2 or L. So some of the forms listed on this slide are generated by our office via a student request. So the student initiates that request through the R Global portal. And for on-campus verification, I just want to show you a note here that you might be familiar with this form if you're hiring a student to work on campus within your department. If a student asks you to complete this letter here, please note that the signature at the bottom does need to be done in pen. It needs to be done in ink because this is a Social Security Administration standard. So I know we all sign things through, Adobe now, but for this form in particular, it needs to be printed and signed with a pen in order to be accepted by the Social Security Administration. And finally, post-graduation options. So when our students are ready to graduate and consider their next steps, we are there to support them and help them understand what to do. In general, students have several options after graduation, and those are listed here on the slide. Students typically take these actions in their final semester, although many try to plan as early in advance as possible, and we appreciate that too. But international students that are on the F1 visa are eligible to apply for OPT. Again, optional practical training, work authorization, and J1 students may apply for the AT, academic training. They can also transfer to another school or even change their program and degree level at Rutgers itself. They might have plans to change their current immigration status to a different visa category. Or sometimes they just want to go home and they're done for a little bit and want to take a break and depart the United States. A key point here to remember is that there are grace periods for F and J students. That's the time that they are given post completing their program to take this next action, the grace period. And it's different for F and J students. The timeline is different, the time frame. So the students in those specific visa categories need to be aware of this. And with that, I am done with my section, and I will be introducing or passing this along to the other Stephanie and Chelsea. Thank you.
Hello, I am Stephanie. I'm the Assistant Director for Compliance and PDSO. I work mainly with Rutgers Health, Admissions, the Registrar's Office, OIT, and I also work closely with our Newark and Camden International Services offices. I'm responsible for maintaining our I-17 certification to host international students, ensuring compliance, and providing various data points to many campuses across many units across campus. I have also been with Rutgers Global for 11 years. Before we move on, I'm going to pass it to Chelsea.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea Jeffries, and I'm the International Student Data and CVIS Coordinator. Some of the things I help out with are CVIS registration. I assist with compliance and reporting tasks in CVIS. And I've been with Rutgers Global since April 2023. And I'm just going to pass it back to Stephanie.
Thank you. So I'm not sure if any of you were able to review the second approver procedure manual that we included in our email that we sent out, but it takes you through the step-by-step process of how our system, which is known as the R Global Portal, communicates the student's information and requests via an e-form. This then allows us to update CVIS. In case you have never seen what the student sees, the student would access the R Global Portal using their net ID, and then they can complete a request to reduce their credit load, ask for CPT, or apply for an extension of program. They will provide an academic official's email from the list that we maintain. All students' requests are accessed here in this R Global Portal. This is, of course, not to be confused with the many portals that Rutgers has. This slide shows the home screen of the student's R Global Portal. Once they successfully log in, they can find any e-form requests by navigating through the left-hand tabs. For instance, an F1 student looking to apply for CPT would navigate to the F1 Practical Training tab to find the Curricular Practical Training e-form. All emails that have been sent through the student's record will be listed under the Notifications tab. And finally, any e-form requests that have been started, approved, or are pending approval from our office will be shown under the Requests tab. Here's an example of what the student will see when they are looking to apply for CPT. They navigate to the F1 Practical Training tab, then click the box that says Curricular Practical Training. After the student completes an e-form for a request, the student may or may not need your department to take action and or approve this request. For example, a travel signature would not need your approval, but if the student is applying for CPT or changing their degree, they will need the academic approvals input. So the assigned academic official, which is usually the dean, graduate program director, or registrar if it's a Rutgers Health student, will be sent an email with a password and link asking them to sign on and complete the e-form request. The next slide shows the department view of approving an e-form. As you can see from this slide, there are a few questions that you need to be prepared to complete and submit. The link at the top of the screen will bring you to the information that the student has entered before submitting the request to you. We sometimes have to remind the assigned approver to respond. In this case, the approver will need to use the most recent email and link that was sent in the latest reminder. Also, if you are approved to sign off on an academic request and your graduate program director or school is comfortable with you being the assigned approver, we can make changes in the online system to ensure it is going to the most appropriate contact. I think I'm going to pass it back to Maya.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm responding to a message in the chat here. Bill had a great question. So I want to take a little bit of time since we have time before our midway point is 10:30. So that's technically the second part of the workshop. Excuse me. But before we get there, I wanted to address some questions that folks had put in the registration forms. And so there were some really good questions. And so I wanted to kind of address those head on. And then we still have time before 10:30 to answer any other follow-up questions that people might have from the first half of the workshop. So first of all, there were some questions about hiring international students. I'm not sure what those specific questions may be. Steph did talk a little bit about the onboarding process, payroll, I-9s, things like that. But basically, when it comes to hiring international students, we did confirm with University Human Relations that each hiring unit should have their own contacts, their standard contacts in HR for onboarding students. So if they have further questions, they're not sure about something, then they can contact the OneSource, and OneSource can advise them on their specific questions from the University Human Relations Department. So we do have a link for the OneSource. We can pop that in the chat. But OneSource is really your place to go if you have a question about onboarding an international student. We can try to help, but oftentimes we will refer you back to HR for those questions about onboarding and hiring. Someone else had an interesting question about supporting parents of international students and how we work with parents of international students. So there's a few things to note here. One is that at pre-departure orientation, or the PDO program, that's the one we talked about, in which we send a delegation over to India and China for a couple weeks, and they meet with students who are committed to coming for the fall. We do have that opportunity where we can meet and talk to parents and families in person. And then also at orientation in the fall, we have a parent-family orientation program that runs during the day when students are in sessions with us. The parents can register for a parent-family orientation that's run by the Office of, I think it's New Students and Transitions, but they run that event for parents, and it's great. It involves a lunch, a tour, speakers from lots of different offices. So we have that for parents. We will have, or that office will also offer, a virtual parent-family orientation in January for the students who are coming in the spring. Lastly, a way that we sometimes interface with parents is during the change of status process. So as you may know, a lot of students, as we've kind of referenced before, students at Rutgers are on lots of different visa types. We're responsible for the F1 and J1 international students, but there could be students who are here on an H4 visa or an L2 visa or an R2 visa, and lots of different visas throughout the alphabet. A lot of times those students may choose to change to an F1 visa type, to F1 status during their time here for all sorts of reasons. Either they might be aging out of their current status, or they just may have different benefits offered to them under F1, so they choose to change their status. When they choose to change their status, they need to request an I-20 document. Remember, that's the immigration certification document for students who are applying for the F1 visa. We will issue that out of our office for change of status students. So frequently students will come to us for that initial meeting about their change of status application and how to request I-20, and they will oftentimes bring with them their parents. And so our advisors who are here today will have many meetings either on Zoom or in person where it's a student and mom and dad who are with them. So we'll talk with parents in those cases. But as always, as I'm sure many of you can relate, we try to gently and firmly nudge the students and families as much as possible that once a student is, here with us on F1 status, they need to discuss their immigration concerns with us directly. The student has to bring it to us. We can't just, for FERPA reasons, obviously, we can't just talk to the parents. It really needs to go through the student. So that's our role with change of status. And the other thing about change of status too, since someone else had also asked about general change of status questions, we do advise students to also consult with an immigration attorney for complex change of status questions, because depending on the status they're changing from, depending on the timing of them aging out potentially, there may be other concerns. Maybe the parents have applied for a green card and they're somewhere in that process. So when it's outside of F and J, our advice is limited. And so we will advise students to consult with an immigration attorney if they have more complicated questions about their exiting status and the transition into F1. The last question I'll mention here, and then I'll open up the floor for other questions, is that some folks in the registration were asking about degree completion dates. And so how do we determine a degree completion date? So first of all, the answer is ISSS does not determine the degree completion date When this is requested or required is when a student is applying for a benefit such as OPT, and they do their OPT application. Then the student needs to discuss with their department or their academic advisor about what their degree completion date is. It's pretty straightforward for undergraduate students, but there's a lot more flexibility and variation when it comes to graduate students, especially ones that have a thesis requirement, or for PhD doctoral students. And so we do ask that the program director or the dean work with the student and decide on the degree completion date. They indicate it in an e-form through the Our Global portal when the student applies for OPT. The academic director or graduate program director, the GPD or the dean will decide on the degree completion date that makes sense for the student. And so it's really based on the academics, based on maybe when the student is planning to, give their defense or turn in their revisions. And so again, anytime that there are efforts to streamline departmental policies and academic expectations to settle on the degree completion date, then all that is appreciated. But if there's follow-up questions, obviously we can advise on a case by case. Okay, and I'm reading Bill's comment here. Okay. Yes, very good questions, Bill. Okay. All right, I can open up now for more questions, either in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, that is welcome too. We can have a little time for conversation here. Dr. Jean Marie Soriano is asking, for those teaching, is there an indication on the roster of international students? As far as I don't even know what the roster is that you're referring to, because I don't think that that's something that's shared with our office. And so I think I'm not sure. I would think that if someone's teaching that it is not indicated as far as if they're international or not, but without seeing the roster that you've been referring to, I'm not sure. Matt is asking, is there an indication on IMS of international student other than the address page? So in IMS, it would be, or that's SRDB, right? IMS, the visa coding and international status would also show in the CDD screen. So, and if you have access to the CD screen, but that would also indicate whether they're international or not. And obviously, whenever in doubt, if you have a student and you're not sure if they're international or if they're F1J run, you can also just reach out to us or your departmental liaison within our office, and we can check on that. And thanks,
I just
Kevin.
want to mention one thing. If we do, we are seeing, we do work with refugee students. So depending on, they could have different codes depending on which screen you're looking at. But if you have questions, again, like Maya said, just best to ask.
Thank you, Carissa. Okay, what other questions? And please feel free to unmute. Questions or comments or points that might need clarity from the first half of the workshop today.
I had one quick question that's relatively specific. I know it was mentioned earlier that international students who experience a crime or are a victim of a crime need to report that, and there's a process for that. Is there any time where that could impact their status, being a victim of a crime?
That's a great question, Bill. No. If they're a victim of a crime, then there's no potential termination there. Really, when you talk about affecting a student status, would be if we were to proactively go and terminate the student's SEVIS record. And within SEVIS, there's very, very specific reasons for termination, such as dropping below full-time course load or without authorization, right? Without authorization, or working without authorization. There's lots of different reasons why we would terminate, but being the victim of a crime certainly is not one of those. Yeah. Yes.
I was just going to say, if you ever have a student case where we have a lot of students that are referred to us from departments that they're not sure where to begin with the support. And we really connect well with all of our campus partners like students and RUPD to make sure students are getting the support they need. Because sometimes it's just so overwhelming. The student knows, well, I know Rutgers Global, I'm an international student. They help international students and they'll start with us and then we can help connect them just as a general, message of support. If they don't know where to begin, a lot of times they start with us and then we help loop in the right people that are able to help address the concerns for whatever issue they're experiencing. So.
Can I just add one thing in terms of reporting the incident? If there's a crime, that's specifically for J1 students. I mean, we obviously want to support anyone if there is a crime, but specifically for J1 students, they're required to report to us, and or we are obligated to report to the Department of State. And I can see it being an issue for them. For example, say we have someone that's scammed and they don't have then funds to support their education. I'm not saying that they're going to get in trouble, but we've had students that then lose a lot of money, and then it become an issue for them to maintain their status here if they don't have funding. So that might be an example of how it could hopefully not go that far, but they have an obligation to report to us, and we also have an obligation to report for J1 students to the Department of State.
Thanks, Carissa, for clarifying. Also, somebody had requested that we put back up on the screen the onboarding slide, and so that is back in the screen. And I also would mention that an email that Carissa sent yesterday, I believe that there was a screenshot of kind of the process for onboarding a student, and that's also on our website. So we can even maybe locate that on our employment page and drop that in the chat. Something that people ask about every now and then, but I haven't heard today, but I just want to put out there, is about taxes and what support students have for paying their taxes. So international students, if they earn income, they are required to pay taxes. And so we have, we purchase a number of slots for students to utilize through Glacier Tax Prep. And we provide that link to students in February. So in February, students can click on that link and they can use Glacier Tax Prep to prepare their taxes. And Glacier actually also offers several Zoom webinars, I think weekly or several times a week, even throughout the spring, where they will take questions from students about how to file their taxes. And so we're not obviously accountants in our office, so we can't offer tax advice, but we can direct students to Glacier Tax Prep for getting tax advice and directions when it comes to tax season. Other questions? Going once and twice. Okay. If there are no more questions at this point, I will say people can, obviously feel free to disconnect, walk away from your screen for a little bit, stretch. We'll come back at 10:30 to start the second part. But before everybody leaves, I just want to do a few quick reminders. Again, please stick around for the second half of the workshop, and do the evaluation at the end so that you can get the digital badge for attending today, which will be great. I also want to mention too that we have a couple of really great videos. I think we mentioned earlier on when Elizabeth was going through the different units that fall under Rutgers Global, under I think GPSI, the Global Programs Strategic Initiatives. We have a really, really wonderful marketing and communications team. So we're really fortunate to have the talents of a small team of folks that puts together really excellent videos for our students and of our students, and ways to showcase things that are happening within Global. So we're going to drop in the chat, excuse me, a couple of videos of our students. One is and you can watch them during the break if you want. The first video is about 1.5 minutes. The second video is about 4 minutes. If you'd like to watch them before the end of the break, and then we'll come back at 10:30, that's great. If you want to just put them aside and look at them on your own time, then that's really awesome too. But the first video is it's a compilation of all of our orientation leader team for the fall. And so this will show the various students that we hired to be orientation leaders. Most are international, but some are domestic. And so these are the students that helped us run orientation for the students in the fall. And then the second video showcases one of our really, really outstanding graduate students and how he does research and his experience at Rutgers. And so if we could put those in the chat, that would be awesome. Thank you so much, Steph. So I would encourage you to watch these again, either during the break or on your own time. Maybe some of you know Eduardo. He's one of our star students, and you might recognize some of the students who are our orientation leaders. So otherwise, we will plan to meet back here at 10:30 to resume part 2. And just so you have a sneak peek of part 2, we will go over some immigration updates, the current landscape of immigration and what we're seeing at ISSS. And we'll also do a deep dive into case studies, which will have some great opportunities to talk about specific regulations, how they apply to students from a hypothetical context, and sort of deep dive and discuss and work through how we all work to support students through those cases. So thank you again for joining this morning, and we will see you all back at 10:30. All right, everybody, welcome back. It is now 10:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the second half of the workshop. If any of you are joining us new, thanks for just now joining us. But I think most of you are returning from the first half, so thank you for sticking with us. I know that it's a very busy time for folks, especially with registration happening right now. So again, we appreciate your time, and we are very, very happy and grateful to have you here. So now that we have we've been able to spend time discussing the international student journey, as well as our Office of Services and the Our Global portal, and answered some registration questions, we're going to start the second half of the workshop with some important updates from ISSS, and then we'll go through some case studies. We will have plenty of time throughout the second half to answer any questions and have some Q&A if there's still some points of uncertainty or something comes up that you're not sure about. So please do continue to use the Q&A if you have any pressing questions, and otherwise know that there will be time to go through some more detailed questions when we get to the case studies. And I realized I did not officially introduce myself earlier, and so I can go through my own quick introduction. Again, I'm Maya Sarno, Associate Director for Student Support. I help oversee the advising services within our office, and I work with many of you as our campus partners. And so again, thanks so much for coming today. It's so nice to see so many of you here. Fun fact about me, it may not be that fun. For me, it's fun when I meet other people from where I'm from, but I'm from Missouri. I feel like I don't meet many Midwesterners, or at least specifically folks from Missouri out here in New Jersey. So it's always fun to me if I meet anybody who's like, oh, you're from St. Louis, I know where that is. So that's my fun fact. And I've been at Rutgers for about 10 years. I started at Rutgers Newark, where I actually worked with Andrew for a little while. And then it came over here to New Brunswick just ahead of the pandemic in 2020. And I'm very, very happy to have landed here. All right, so now I'm going to take a few minutes to go over the current immigration landscape as it pertains to international students. So first, this is a little bit of a review we talked about in the first half and touched on just a little bit, reminding everybody about the current government guidance as it relates to online courses. So international students on an F1 or J1 visa are limited to enrolling in no more than one 3-credit online course, counting toward their full credit enrollment. So for undergraduate students whose full-time enrollment is 12 credits for undergrads, that means that 9 of those credits must be in person, and then they can do a 3-credit online course. Full-time enrollment for graduate students is 9 credits per semester, so 6 of those credits must be in person. For some students, as several of you may know, depending on your department, meeting the regulatory requirement about the online classes has been challenging. And in fact, it's gotten increasingly challenging since the pandemic as more and more courses are being offered online. But please note that hybrid courses, or any course that has any sort of in-person component, does count as an in-person class, okay? So when students are asking us about, how do I count a hybrid class? Does that count as online or in person? We say it counts as in person, and we do encourage students to, document those in-person components of each class. And that when our academic partners come to us saying that they're having a hard time building a student schedule that meets that requirement, we do encourage our academic partners and appreciate it very much when they can be accommodating and creative in such cases, maybe thinking through other ways that students can, meet an in-person requirement for those otherwise online classes. So as we all work together to help students continue to make normal progress and maintain their status as they go through the program. And I see that Rebecca has a question in the chat. Am I correct that students can do 2 online classes as long as they're taking 2 in-person classes? Yes. So that's a great question, Rebecca. So here's an example. If those two in-person courses are 3 credits each, then that's 3 plus 3 is 6. So they're taking 6 credits of in-person and then 3 credits of online. So that makes up the 9 credits total. So they're meeting the regulatory requirements. If they want to take an additional online course on top of their full-time enrollment, that is fine. So I hope that makes it clear. Thanks for asking that question, Rebecca. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some additional support for students. We have our International Academic Support Team, which I've referenced. Them, along with the ISSS staff and along with several campus partners and even partners off campus, have been working with students who've been affected by geopolitical crises, and we're doing our best efforts to tailor our support services for them. So specifically, we offer support and we welcome we currently serve students from Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Russia, and unfortunately, the list of other troubled regions, the list seems to continue to grow. But we do really try to serve these students and help them with their specific needs as they go throughout their program. Rutgers Global as a whole is actively supporting student refugees from many of these countries. So we are working on, welcoming refugee students as well as their families. Some of them still have family members, spouses, or children who are overseas. And Rutgers Global is working to support them in their arrivals here. And so it really does take a village to support these students. And so we collaborate, again, among each other within Rutgers Global, as well as campus partners, as well as local community agencies and other global units to prepare for the students' arrivals and support them as they settle into life at Rutgers. So speaking about just various types of international students, I want to mention that it's very interesting. We are seeing more and more students, and this was referenced earlier in the workshop too, but I want to talk about it a little bit more in detail. We're seeing more students who identify as international, but they're not F1 or J1. So F1 or J1 means they're here under Rutgers sponsorship, but we see other visa types. And so, as I mentioned before, there's kind of an alphabet soup with visas. You literally have A through Z, all different visa types. Some other ones we see are H4, L2, R2, O2, just lots of different visa types. So those students who are on non-F1 or J1 visas are, for example, students whose parents are here on a work visa, or their parents are here on a visa that's for foreign government officials, or they're intercompany transferees. Those are the L2 visa holders. And that just names a few examples. So there's lots of other visa types I'm not even mentioning. And there's also a lot of students at Rutgers who are technically US citizens, but who were raised in a foreign country, and they think of themselves as international students. So they'll come to us at orientation and say, I want to join international student orientation. I'm an international student, but really they're a US citizen. So it's really very interesting as the world becomes more and more, global and the world feels smaller. The definition of international student almost gets a little bit more blurred from the student standpoint. So again, just to clarify, for our office, we are limited to really advising F1 and J students on immigration regulations, but I want everyone to be aware of the variety of students that we have at Rutgers and the many that may consider themselves international, but for advisement purposes from our office, they're not international in the same sense as we think of them. When thinking about these different visa statuses, each status has very specific legal requirements that governs that particular status. So every now and then a student will come to us, will come to our attention, or a department contact will reach out about a student with very specific questions about employment or about part-time or full-time enrollment eligibility or about in-state tuition eligibility. So these are situations in which ISSS really can't offer advice for these students, immigration or otherwise, but we really try to work closely with our various campus partners to effectively direct these students so that they, don't get lost in the shuffle at Rutgers. We try to help provide them the proper campus resources, and we're keeping these populations in mind as we look to see how we can address them from the time that they arrive to Rutgers and make them feel welcome into the community, even though they're not technically one of our international students. So Getting back now to the F1 and J1 students. We've also, another trend that we have seen, unfortunately, in the last few years is we've seen an uptick in students who are unable to afford off-campus housing. As everyone knows, this cost of living can be tricky in New Jersey, and students have increasingly large balances and registration holds. So it's been tricky for a lot of students, especially who are living off campus. So we've tried to direct these students to resources such as the Office of Off-Campus Living and Community Partnerships. We also work very closely with student accounting on an individual case-by-case basis to try to direct students there when a payment plan might be possible, or maybe a registration hold can be resolved. And we also should mention too, we do have emergency grant funding that's available in our office. And so this is very much a case-by-case evaluation process where if a student needs help on an emergency, limited basis, we will advise a student and can maybe provide some minimal support in a financial way to them. Okay, and then lastly, this last bullet references, we really can't talk about the immigration landscape without addressing the recent presidential election and the incoming administration. So students and community partners are more and more frequently in the last few days even raising questions about anticipated changes. As these changes are coming up, we're reminding both our campus partners and our students that a transition between presidential administrations can often produce shifts in policy changes, and we understand that, along with the potential for uncertainty. So we get that the anxiety is real. We appreciate it and we understand it. But however, no changes to immigration rules or policies for international students have been announced yet. Nothing's been announced at this time. And should any changes be announced after the new administration takes office, we will share additional information with all who may be affected. While we don't want to raise alarm and we don't want to speculate, we are very closely monitoring any upcoming changes, and we're staying connected with our Office of Federal Relations in DC, along with our professional associations, attending webinars, reading articles, and also conferring with our peer institutions, both in the Big Ten and otherwise. There was a recent article in the Chronicle in the Latitudes post by Karen Fisher. And that article provides a nice overview of potential changes that may be in store for international education. We're happy to share a PDF of the article with you. We can drop it in the chat, or if later on, if you want to reach out to us, we can also provide it to you directly through email. But one concern that's come up a lot is around potential travel restrictions, as were experienced before, which could impact our students trying to return from the winter break. So please, as much as you can, if students ask about this, we should be encouraging students to get back in time for the start of classes. And really, that's no different. If there were no change in administration, we would still be encouraging students to be here in time for the start of classes, okay, regardless of Lunar New Year, regardless of, personal celebrations or obligations that they have at home. Students are expected to be back here for the start of classes in any given semester. And so that's something that, as much as you can help reiterate that to students, that's something we can all be very consistent upon when advising. So overall student mobility, academic and cultural exchange programs may be impacted in ways that we cannot yet predict with the new administration. But there's also worry specifically about what will be the future of undocumented and refugee students. So again, we are keeping an eye on all of these changes, and we are hopeful about our ability to at least help students navigate these changes, and we will continue to offer personalized advising to all our international students. We're happy to be a resource for our campus partners. We will keep you all posted of any updates that you all need to know about. But please know that you can always refer to our alerts page. We keep the alerts page updated with immigration alerts that can affect our students. We also have email notices that are sent out to all our international students. And so they get an email notice once a month, and many of you are BCC'd on those notices, so you may receive them already. But if you don't receive the notices, we have a web page that has links to all the previous notices from the last several months. And if you'd like to be added to them, please let us know, and we are more than happy to include you on the BCC list so that you receive the updates at the same time that the students receive updates. All right, so now that we've gone through the landscape, I would like to hand it off to my colleague, Lauren Kramer.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren Kramer. I'm an international student advisor in the office. I'm a liaison for several of the graduate programs. If the word engineering, statistics, or bio something is in your program name, with the exception of one or two programs, then I'm your liaison. A lot of these programs have high populations of international students, so I'm really fortunate to work with some really committed and collaborative staff, some of whom I see on the call today, so that's awesome. One of the things I work on in addition to my normal advising duties is the digital badge that was mentioned already. I've been a part of that project, and I'm excited to continue exploring resources and modules that we are hope to create to attach to this new digital badge that would be available to our campus partners. I've been at Rutgers for 1.5 years, and a fun fact about me is that I studied abroad in Egypt at the American University in Cairo. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the current challenges that us and our international students face. As you can imagine, the effects of the pandemic are still felt by our students in their everyday lives. Some of the most common challenges, excuse me, as Maya referred to, or other staff have already referred to, include registering for enough in-person classes. As we know, many classes, were moved online, and that continues to happen, as well as paying off their tuition bills, many of which include balances from prior semesters. Inflation, economic hardships, geopolitics, conflict back at home are all things that can impact an international student's ability to support themselves. And so they often come to our office to ask for help, finding on-campus jobs, or, help with communicating with other offices about, their financial hardship, or asking for resources. So we work closely with, many campus partners when students are facing these kinds of challenges, with health services, with One Stop, the registrar's office, student accounting, to ensure that the students are, compliant, maintaining their status, but also, excuse me, adequately supported on all fronts. Mental health, as I'm sure many of you have seen, mental health and overall well-being are other areas of particular concern, as we see a growing number of cases around these issues that require us to collaborate with CAPS, the Dean of Students, and health services. Leaves of absence, academic sanctions, conduct cases, and a variety of crises that could come up throughout the year are places where we work closely with those offices to help students, not just addressing mental wellness or mental health issues, but also encouraging them to prioritize it and trying to address that proactively. We also work closely with academic units when curricular requirements change, because in those cases we're required to submit updated program statements and an updated certification form to the student and exchange visitor program. And it was mentioned before that we had an increased number of international students this year. We hope to see that continue. So we remain grateful and appreciative for the strong collaborations that we have with so many campus partners in supporting our students. So continuing talking about current challenges, we specifically wanted to address CPT, curricular practical training, as this is an area where we receive a lot of questions, both from staff and students, how a CPT can fit into a program, what are the registration requirements, what are the flexibilities that exist, etc. So you can see these do's and don'ts here. It's important to remember that the purpose of F1 status and the visa is to study, not work. And while there are certain benefits attached to F1 where that do allow a student to engage in that kind of practical training, their studies are the priority. And so students are expected to navigate and understand the policies and requirements around CPT, with our help. So hopefully these do's and don'ts kind of help, help you see how our office, together with academic units, are responsible for explaining and interpreting the F1 regulations and how they intersect with institutional policy and academic curriculum, because CPT is one of those areas where students need to really kind of understand both parts of that, what the regulations are permitting them to do or not do, and then the academic side of it and how this is a part of their academic requirement and what their program requirements are. So we look for your guidance on how students can make normal progress and how meet the academic requirements while we are advising them on the immigration regulations. If the CPT application is complete and if the work experience is academically supported, we can issue that proper work authorization for a CPT. And so your input in identifying the academic nature and requirements for those internship opportunities is key to our work in applying the F1 regulations. We know it can be stressful and challenging when students are being a bit pushy or forward about a CPT opportunity, especially if it's something they got and need to start really soon. And so having CPT policies outlined on your website or in internal, like a department handbook, can help ensure that students are prepared to, appropriately move forward with the CPT. And I just want to note, I wasn't going to read everything on the slide, but I do just want to point out one thing that, there are certain limited specific circumstances where full-time CPT is possible during fall or spring break, but those are limited exceptional circumstances. And so if you ever have questions about that, if you're not sure if a student can be authorized for a full-time CPT, absolutely reach out to us. You're into your liaison and we will work with you to see if there, that's an appropriate option for that student. So yeah, I am going to transition it over to Young now to begin our case studies.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Young. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. So I'm one of the international student advisors in this office. I'm the liaison to all the undergraduate programs except for SAS. And I'm the liaison for 2 grad programs on classics and sociology. One special project I do here in this office is to collab with CAPS on the mental health wellness workshops. So I'm gonna send a flyer to the chat in a bit. So if any of your students are interested in joining the workshop, we have one more this semester, which I believe will be in the beginning of December. And we'll talk about homesickness, which I think is a very important topic to address for our international students, especially during the holiday time. And a fun fact about me is I came to the US as an international student on F1 status myself more than 10 years ago. And now let's walk through some case studies together. As we read through each case study, please keep in mind of the important international student considerations we have discussed earlier this morning. The answers for each case study might not be straightforward, but we will discuss and come to the best conclusion for each case study. And all of you are encouraged to ask questions and contribute to the discussions. So now let's start with the first case study. Xinyi is a doctoral student in computer science and has an opportunity to intern at a startup company during the summer break. If she does a good job, the company may even ask her to stay on for the fall semester, working full-time. So this is a wonderful opportunity for the student, but it is unpaid. The student casually mentioned this opportunity to you in a passing conversation and is very excited to add it to her resume. What do you do? A, you explain that if this is work in her field, paid or unpaid, it could be viewed as employment, and she may need authorization to participate in it. She should review the rules for CPT and contact her GPD, which is Graduate Program Director, to coordinate the appropriate CPT credits and immigration approval. You also note that she can only work full-time during the fall semester if she has an approved reduced credit load, but during the summer break, she can work 20 hours or more. B, you explain she may want to ask the startup company if she needs an SSN number. If they ask the students for the SSN, then it is employment, and she should contact the ISSS office. As for the working full-time, she planned to take a full-time course load in fall 2024, so you remind her to manage her time well. C, you don't say anything to the student because it is unpaid, and it should be okay, and she does not need to complete any paperwork. Now, I'm going to launch the poll for this case study, and I would like everyone to contribute and pick the most appropriate answer that you think fit in this situation. I just launched the poll. Let me know if you can all see it. All right, I see answers coming through. All right. I'm gonna give a few more seconds so everyone can answer this case study 1. We now have about 30 participants who answered the question already. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna give 15 more seconds. Five, four, three, two, one. All right, we get 40 answers, and 88% of you answered A and 13 answered B. And I'm gonna end the poll and then explain details. So most of you get the correct answer. It's A. So even though this opportunity is unpaid, this can still be viewed as employment. So for F1 students, if they want to work off campus, they must have the authorization before they can work off campus. So this case would be a CPT, since this internship might be related to the student's program of study. If the students want to request CPT authorization, the first step for them is usually to contact their academic department. For graduate students, it's usually their graduate program director. And for undergrad students, it's their academic official from their school to ask whether the academic department can approve CPT for that particular off-campus work. And then the students will coordinate with the department to enroll in a CPT course. And after that, they will request the CPT authorization from my office by completing our CPTE form. So this is the general CPT procedure. I see questions, but I guess we can answer questions after we share the answer. In terms of full-time CPT, during summer and winter break, students can request full-time CPT. However, during fall and spring semesters, they can request full-time CPT if they have been approved for reduced credit load. Some few programs at Rutgers allow students to work on full-time CPT while they're enrolling a full-time course load. Those programs are rare. On top of my hand, I know data science master, data science is one of them. But again, majority of the programs don't allow students to work full-time CPT if they're a full-time student here. And the other regulation for CPT is that the students has to enroll on a full-time based on a full-time course load for at least 2 academic years before they're eligible for CPT, unless their academic program require all the students to participate in the off-campus internship co-op immediately. On top of my hand, I know the master program in data science and social work. They're the two programs that could allow students to participate CPT right away. But other than that, most programs would require students to complete at least one academic year before they can request CPT opportunity. Last but not least, we usually advise students to be cautious of what they put on their resume and LinkedIn profile. If they want to include any off-campus employment on their resume, they should have the appropriate authorization. We have heard from some CBP officers to check the student's LinkedIn profile when the students are entering the US. So again, it is very important to remind the students if they want to work off campus, they should seek for authorization before they can do so. Any questions about this case study or related any CPT questions? I know I saw one hand. So please either unmute yourself to ask questions or you can type your questions in the chat. Matt, do you have any questions? Yes. All right. All right. So thank you. Now, if you come through more questions about CPT, feel free to type in the chat. And now I'm gonna pass to my colleague Charles to start our case study too.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Charles Huntley. I'm an international student advisor here. I work at the Newark location. I am the liaison for Mason Grove School of Arts, which includes music, theater, and visual arts. I'm also the Rutgers Health Specialist for Newark and Piscataway campuses. I focus on trying to build relationships with students through in-person events such as Welcome Back event and the annual Thanksgiving celebration, which we had last week, and we had almost 70 students and faculty there. And fun fact about me, I'm originally from a very, very small town in South Carolina called Sherrod. Okay, so my case study is number 2. Soo Young is a master's student in marine biology. She wants to go home to South Korea for the summer break to help work at her sister's holiday boutique. She plans to come back to Rutgers 3 weeks after the fall semester begins. Her I-20 expires May 2025, but she is not yet done with her degree requirements, and her planned graduation is in January 2026. Her F1 visa has also expired. What reminders does she need? A, you explained that the student should get a travel signature for their trip home to renew their visa and complete the travel signature e-form. She's already aware of the deadline to apply for the January graduation. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. She's already aware of the deadline to apply for the January graduation, so she will take care of that later. You direct her to ISSS Quick Question Advising to have her visa questions answered. B, you first tell Soo Young that her I-20 can expire before her graduation date, before she graduates, and to work with ISSS to update her I-20. Her F1 visa needs to be renewed before she can return to the United States, since it is used for travel. Finally, explain to Soo Young that students are expected to be attending in-person courses to maintain their immigration status and reinforce that she is expected to be here for the start of classes. And finally, C. You think that she may need CPT to work in South Korea, so suggest that she applies for a Social Security number, which is SSN, if she does not already have one. You also let her know returning after 3 weeks is totally fine, since she will be taking 100% online classes for the fall 2024 semester. However, if she needs to come back, if she needs to come back too late, she may need to consider a leave of absence. Okay, I'm going to launch the poll. Give me 1 second. Doesn't look like go back, case study number 2. Okay, the poll has been launched, everybody. Looks like I have about 25. Let's try to get back up to 40 like we did last time. This one's a little tricky. Okay, looks like I have 30. I'm going to give it maybe 30 more seconds. Come on, everybody. Let's try to get back up to 40 if we can. Okay, we're almost there. Okay, so looks like we're almost there. We have one person's a little shy and one else. It's okay. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. But before I say the answer, does anybody want to jump out there and tell me what they think the answer would be?
So
Go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
So I've been to this training a lot, and there's a lot of good information in A, but as an advisor, my biggest concern is being 3 weeks late for classes. So I believe that B is the best answer because that's something that's kind of not negotiable. Students have to be here and be on campus and in their classes when classes start if they're an international student.
Good point. Good point. Does anybody else have any follow-up with that? Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Now, looks like 90% of everyone said B, 10% said A. This one is a little tricky, so I can see why some people would lean towards A. So I'm going to end the poll. Let's see what the answer is. The answer is B, just like Matt said. The reason why the answer has to be B is multi layers of it. You can't allow your I-20 to expire while you're attending school here at Rutgers. You have to have a valid I-20. So first, if she knows it's going to expire before the program ends, she's going to have to apply for an extension of program first. Second, as it was mentioned earlier in the presentation, that once a student is in the United States under their F1 visa status, they do not have to worry about renewing their visa unless they depart the United States. They can be here the entire time on the undergraduate studies, the graduate studies, post-completion OPT, STEM, all of that with the visa not being valid. But the moment they decide to exit the United States and come back into the United States, they must have a valid visa. There's no way to get around that. And finally, to what Matt spoke about, it is highly recommended that when students tell us, because we as advisors have students tell us all the time that, I'm going to be maybe 3 or 4 weeks late, maybe starting, school starts January 21st. They want to come maybe mid-February. And we advise them like that's not, in the spirit of the regulations. And this is not something that we can agree upon, especially if they don't have prior approval from their academic official from their department. They're expected to be here to start classes. Anybody have any questions before we move on?
Does anyone see an issue with answer number C or answer letter C?
I don't even know where to start with that one. That's why I didn't even entertain. There's so many levels on that. I tried to read it with the straightest face possible.
There was a 100% online classes part to that. So
there's no way possible that a student under F1 regulations can be in a 100% online course.
If they're planning to be back in the US. Yep.
Yes. If they want to maintain their F1 regulations. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. Well, thank you all for listening to me. Now we'll move on to my colleague, Adeline.
Hi, everybody. My name is Adeline Tao, and I'm the International Student Coordinator at our global ISSS. I mainly focus on e-forms and student programming, and even language exchange that I do for fun with my professors in the past. And the fun fact is I've studied abroad 6 times in my undergraduate career and graduate career. I've been to China, Japan twice, Taiwan, Hungary, and Mexico. And actually, shout out to Matt again. I went with the GSC and it was such a great program. So, total plug, but yeah. And I've been with ISSS since August 2024. So, this case study is case study number 3. So, I'm going to go ahead and read it. Rohit is an F1 student admitted to Rutgers for fall 2024, and your department will offer him an assistantship. He plans to arrive in the US on September 1st, just 2 days before the start of the fall term. He asks you how he can get an international payroll form to start his job on September 3rd. So here are the choices. A. You tell the student to go to the Social Security Administration or the SSA office with his offer letter whenever he gets around to it. The office will give him the SSN card on the same day he applies, and he can begin working now. You ask for his I-20 and his passport so you can add him to payroll. Or B, you tell the student to upload the TA letter and ask for the international payroll form via the Our Global portal, which is like the portal we mentioned that the international students can request e-forms. He can work for your office once he gets receipt notice from the SSA. Or C, you provide the student with a hard copy of the on-campus verification letter with the pen ink signature. You then direct him to the Rutgers Global ISSS on-campus work website, which has steps on how to request the international payroll form. You then ask the student to follow up with you once they applied for the SSN and add them to payroll once they have their receipt. I'll give you guys a moment to think about it and I will launch the poll. Okay, so it's been launched. Let's see. I'll try to get up to around 40 as well. Very good job. More seconds. All right. I think the majority of you got the answer anyway. All right. I'll end the poll here. So let's see. Okay. So 94% of you got the right answer. So let's move on. Yes. So the right answer here is C. You provide the signature with you provide the student with a hard copy of the on-campus verification letter with the pen ink signature, like we mentioned in part 1, if you remember. And then you can direct him to our website. We have several web pages with a lot of great information which students can go to, and that has the steps on how to request the international payroll form and also further steps on how to go to the SSA. And once they have the social security number, then you can add them to your payroll. So a lot of these things, like I said, are on our website, and it's also through the Our Global portal. First and foremost, actually, if a student ever has a question for you, especially in the beginning of the year, they must complete the check-in e-form first with us. The check-in e-form is for our office to activate their immigration status. So without this step, they will not show in the save system, and it can only be done, and the check-in should only be done once they arrive in the US, such as during the fall or winter semester. So a lot of students, they can't process any other e-forms before they do their check-in. So moving on to the Social Security Administration, like we've mentioned, they require the ink signature on their job offer letter. And if they bring a digital signature, it will be rejected, and it can also delay the student from starting work. And they also have to bring all other required documents in their application. This can also be found on our website. And we have the written steps and the workshops that we suggest students to do as well in order to get the SSN. Another tidbit is that the SSA will actually not serve students unless they've been inside the US for at least 10 days. And again, this can delay their work start date. In our example, Rohit tried, he only arrived 3 days before his start date, so that might be tricky. He needs to be in the US for at least 10 days before they get an SSN. And once the application is accepted, the SSA will give the student a receipt. And we understand some of these departments need this for their I-9 purposes. And lastly, the actual card would come around 2 weeks after, but sometimes it can be delayed. And the payroll form itself is an internal Rutgers form that helps some of the admins get the information they need in order to enter the student onto the payroll. Well, that's all I have for you guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to answer. If not, we can move on to case number 4.
Hi, everyone. This is Lauren. Again, I'll be presenting case study number 4. So Pedro is in his second year of his master's program, and he did poorly this semester, and his GPA dropped significantly compared to last semester. Aside from the change in his grades, he has also asked you about enrolling part-time next semester or going home to take online classes instead. You know these past years have been tough, and he began his program during the pandemic, so it has been challenging for him to adjust to the new life in the US. Where do you direct him to, and what should he consider? A, you ask the student what led to this request and offer your support and empathy. You want to connect the student to the right university resources to address his concerns. For example, you ask if he's aware of CAPS and if he talked to ISSS about a reduced credit load. You suggest he speak to ISSS about the online classes question and send a private email to ISSS about your concerns. B, you decide to email his ISA liaison to ask if they have been in touch with Pedro and let the ISA know you have been concerned about the student. You are hoping the ISSS office will have more information about him and that they will be able to assist. C, you ask the student to come into the office to meet with you so you can tell him all about leave of absences and help him set up an appointment with his advisor. So I'm going to launch the poll, and keep in mind, some of the case studies are tricky because it's not that some answers are technically wrong, but there may be a better, best answer. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this and give everybody a minute to consider the answers. Maybe it wasn't so tricky after all, because I see most people are answering one in particular. Gonna give it another 10 or 15 seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. We do have, there were answers for all 3 guesses for all 3 answers. Okay, so before I share the results and give the correct answer, does anybody have any initial thoughts about this one? Again, I don't think any of these answers are necessarily wrong. It's just that one is the best option. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share the results. And okay, yeah. So the answer, which most people did guess, although again, there were answers for all three options, is A. You ask the student what led to this request and offer your support and empathy. You want to connect the students to the right resources to address his concerns. For example, CAPS, ISSS, suggest he speak to ISSS about the online classes and send an email. So some points about this response. Obviously, something is troubling the student. And so our first job is to listen and direct them to the help they need. Obviously, we are not professional therapists, but lending a listening ear can really go far with students just to ensure they feel heard and supported. It's important to be aware of and connected to the resources at Rutgers that can help students. So if it's mental health, they should be referred to CAPS. If they're struggling with meeting their basic needs, they should be referred to Student Life and the food pantry. We certainly aren't expected to be experts on every issue the student faces, but rather how to direct them and support them. And I want to mention here that the Do Something Concern button found on Rutgers websites, which some of you may be familiar with, is very helpful if students are being unresponsive or you think their behavior is dangerous to themselves or others. It will alert Central Rutgers units that the student may need a wellness check by RUPD or follow-up from violence prevention or some kind of accommodation from Dean of Students office or Grad Life. We've used it before when we've been attempting to contact students about an issue, maybe with their status or I-20, and they have not been replying to communication. And you should also be prepared to talk with the student about the academic policies and the academic side of it. As we've talked about, students are expected to be taking in-person classes. Dropping below that or taking online classes could impact their visa status. And that's where our office comes in to talk to them about what their immigration options are in these situations. If there's an allowable permitted accommodation, an advisor will likely connect with your office to explain and ensure that it's academically possible as well. And we want to mention here specifically that medical reduced credit loads for medical reasons exist and can be processed without academic approval, although we still will loop in the department in some way. In the case of a medical RCL, since it usually means the students will be taking part-time classes or not enrolling at all. We are looking to educate academic units that students have the right to not be registered at all if they have a valid medical or mental health issue, and that does include mental health issues as well. So that is an option for students who are dealing with medical issues. But something to keep in mind is that not enrolling at all, even if permitted by the medical RCL, could have impact, immigration status and limit access to Rutgers services such as CAPS or housing. There could be insurance implications. So it would be important in these situations for our office to be working with all the appropriate offices to ensure the student understands what the implications would be if they were not enrolling. And ensure that they're submitting all the required paperwork to record the leave of absence and then return in the future if that is in their plan. There are also academic, this doesn't necessarily pertain to this specific case study because in this case study, this is a student in their second year, but there are also academic reduced credit load reasons that students may be eligible for in their first semester. For example, if there was an improper course placement or if they're having difficulty with American teaching styles in an American classroom, these kinds of approvals are more rare. They require more investigation and cooperation with professors to understand if the academic issue truly was something that was out of the student's control. And again, there's that in-person requirement for the semester, and that's where we would help to work with the student and advise them. And then finally, students can have an academic, if this student wanted to go home, students can have an academic status abroad without an immigration status in the US. That may affect, benefits such as OPT, whether or not they plan to come back or not, but, that also is a possibility, and we would advise the student appropriately. So Any questions or comments about this case study?
Lauren, I'm going to interrupt just for a minute so I can address a question that's in the chat because it's a really good question. And then obviously we can get back to the case study in case others have questions specifically about the case study. But Alexis has a question about the check-in process. And so this is a really great question and about how students are referred to the check-in process. So there's a few different check-in points, right? For students, there is the Are You Here, which is like run through Rutgers. But then we have our specific check-in that international students are required to do with our office. And so we give as many reminders as possible ad nauseum to students about the check-in process with our office, because for us to register students, which means for us to report them to the government within the first 30 days of their first semester, we have to know certain information that the student must give us. They have to provide their I-94 record, a copy of it, so we know that they've arrived, we know their date of arrival. And we can check that they came in on F1 or J1 status. We need to know their US address, their US phone number, any changes in contact information they need to notify us about. And we also check to make sure that they're enrolled full time so we can do their reporting in SEVIS. So we tell students ahead of time, we send them emails before they even arrive here, and also through our pre-arrival chats, pre-arrival orientations, during orientation, just how important check-in is. And then obviously we send a lot of emails about it, because we really can't complete their registration without the check-in. If there are students who don't do the check-in, then we look at the registrar's list for who's completed Are You Here? And if we really can't locate the student in any of those ways, then we have other ways of trying to find them, maybe working with their academic unit to see if the student's been showing up to class, how we can contact them that way. We really try to have a high-touch way of reaching out to students so that we can locate them and make sure that they complete the check-in with our office. So I hope that addresses the question appropriately. And if there's follow-up questions, please put them in the chat. And again, I'll put it back to Lauren. If there's more questions about this case study, we invite questions about the case study.
Can I add one more thing, Maya?
Please.
So the check-in process is submitting an e-form. So we collect all their documents and ensure they're here, and we have their contact details. And again, like Maya said, students are also updating those details on the separate Rutgers profiles, like My Rutgers and with the registrar and all those pieces. We also, throughout that check-in process and through orientation, encourage students, and it's a requirement for them to complete a workshop that is called Staying in Legal Status. And so that is built in to the arrival of students at Rutgers for their first semester, and they're free to take that workshop at any time if they need a refresher. It goes over many of the points we're making today about maintaining status and, how they need to be full-time, how they need to be in person, work authorization at a higher level, but to basically make sure they understand that they're following the rules. So if a student needs help locating that workshop, it's hosted through the same place that they submit the check-in and all their other immigration requests for their I-20s and DS 2019s, the Our Global Portal, Synapsis, as Stephanie had presented on before. But that's a really great resource for students to watch or, refer to, because I think it helps them understand their requirements to follow as an F1 or J1 student while they're here, because Rutgers is such a big place and they already have other things to focus on. It's all centrally located in the Our Global Portal for them to refer back to. So I just want to mention that workshop too. We call it a workshop. It's a video that they watch with the questions quiz afterwards to make sure that they're understanding what they learned. And it goes over a lot of the points we talked about today. So I love that video. So I just wanted to make sure everyone here was aware that that exists too, to help students follow along with what they're supposed to be doing throughout their degree studies here.
Any final questions about this case study before we go to the final case study? And again, I just want to say, I don't think any of those answers were necessarily wrong actions, but I think A is the best one because it's about nobody expects you guys to be able to advise in detail on reduced credit loads and what it would mean for immigration if they went home. It's just about being able to connect the student with the right resources and not just automatically, without trying to understand the situation, just kind of passing them off onto Rutgers Global. So just about knowing, how just this is I think the best answer, because it's about offering that support, empathy, and listening, and then helping them with directing them with where they need to go. So with that, I will pass it to Audrey for the final case study.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Audrey Nguyen, and I'm an international student advisor here at Rutgers, New Brunswick. I have been in this field since 2018, and I absolutely love it. I love supporting our students. So I have 38 graduate programs that I am the liaison for. So unfortunately, I could not list all of them on this slide, but some of them are the Blaustein School, economics, math, communications, and pharmacy, among others. And I do see a lot of my partners here on this workshop today. So welcome. Good to see you here. Some of the projects that I work on is mainly a really big one. So we talked about the international student orientation that we run every fall, and we even run a smaller one during the spring. And so my role in that is actually to recruit, train, and manage the team of 35 plus orientation leaders that help us to put on this huge event in the fall. So again, I really love doing that. It's a great way for us to connect with the students on a more personal level, and it's just a good time. And so some fun facts about me: I love learning languages, and I actually taught myself how to speak Vietnamese in order to communicate with my husband's parents and to raise our kids bilingually. So a lot of people get surprised when they see me, when they meet me, because of my name, but it's actually my husband from Vietnam, and I just learned along with him. So that's that. Okay, so case study number 5. Timur is a Rutgers graduate who is currently working in your department. He will graduate in January and then apply for OPT. He is finished with all of his coursework in mid-December and will submit the final project thesis by January 6th deadline. He already has an industry job lined up, but he hopes to keep working with your team while on OPT too. His on-campus work contract is originally scheduled to end June 2025. What are the steps the student needs to take, and what do you need from the student to extend their work authorization in the payroll system? Select the best option possible. So A, you alert the student that his contract will need to be prematurely terminated due to him completing his studies before June. However, he can keep working with your office while the OPT is pending. Once he has an EAD card, he will give it to you and the new international payroll form. B, the student can work on campus until a degree completion date, which appears to be January 6, 2025. After that, the only way he can continue working is once the OPT is approved and if the work relates to his major. You suggest that he meets with ISSS to start his OPT application and keep an eye on your emails for the e-form request that asks about his academic end date. You also discuss with HR if he can work while holding an OPT EAD card. Or the last option is C. You suggest that he applies for CPT with ISSS and ask him to complete the request for a new payroll form. His contract was already signed, so therefore it cannot be adjusted. So I'm going to launch the poll now, and you should all pick the best possible answer. Number 5. Okay. So I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to respond, and then we'll go over the answer. A few more seconds. See, about half of you responded. Any last minute responses? Okay. I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. So it looks like a lot of you guys are pretty good with this. The correct answer is B, which 93% of you did select B. One of you selected A, and I can see how that could be confusing, but let's break down why the answer is B. So the correct answer was B. The student can work on campus until his degree completion date, which appears to be January 6th, 2025. After that, the only way you can continue working is once the OPT is approved, and if the work is related to his major, you suggest he meets with ISSS to start the OPT application and check your email for the e-form request. We also discussed with HR if he can work while holding the OPT EAD card. So there's a lot of pieces to this, and so I'm just going to reason with you why this is the correct answer. So F1 students, when they have a I-20, we have the degree completion date. And when they apply for OPT, in some cases, we shorten that I-20, even if, for example, in this situation, his I-20 was valid until May 31st, 2025. Once he applies for OPT, we would change that degree completion date to January 6th, 2025, because that is the date in which all of his degree requirements have been completed for that program, and therefore he has a new program end date of January 6th, 2025. We like to remind students that because a common question we get is, can I extend my degree end date to match the contract end date for a current employer? Usually, a research assistant or a TA position in Rutgers. And the answer is no, because the degree completion date can only be extended for academic reasons and cannot be extended for an employment opportunity. Time and time again, I always like to remind our students that F1 visa is a student visa. So anything you do should be related to your studies, and employment comes second and needs the proper authorization in order to do that. So if you get students asking, like, can I get an extension of program? That's an e-form request that some of you will be managing in your departments. If they say, can I do a extension of program so that I can continue my TA-ship until the end of the contract? If they are finished with everything, then the answer should be no. And that's the reason why. It's also important to note that payments are okay for work that's already been done. So I know sometimes we have students who end in May, but then their contract goes until June, and technically they're allowed to receive stipends. They just cannot physically work during that period. So it is okay for them to receive the payments, but they just cannot work after that specific date. And OPT, I think the end of this answer is important because some departments may not allow a student who's holding an OPT EAD card to work for them. One of the reasons for this is there are some positions within Rutgers that are meant for students only. So they have to be pursuing a degree program in order to be eligible for that employment opportunity. So that's why it says here, you should also discuss with HR if he can work while using the OPT EAD card, because technically he would no longer be a student. So depending on the position, they may not be eligible for that. So again, the last thing to really make sure is that the work is related to the major. In most cases, it would be if they were already working, in your department, maybe as like a research assistant. It likely would be related to their major and therefore would be eligible for OPT. But again, if there's ever any questions or concerns regarding this, please reach out to us. We are doing all of these case studies to really just give you a brief overview of some of the situations that you may face when advising students. And while we don't expect you to be experts in any of this or to officially advise on these particular topics, we just want you to be aware of, the guidelines that are around each of these scenarios and how you can direct students. So with that being said, does anybody have any specific questions for this case study? Yes, I see your hand, Matt, if you want to.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. This is a one that I don't deal with a lot, but is a complex one for us, I think. So I have a couple of questions about this. Sure. First of all, let's talk about students who are not in doctoral programs, master's degree students who want to do this kind of an extension and have completed their degree requirements and are eligible to graduate in January. I think that it would be useful if we were provided, I don't know, some sort of a list of these are the international students in your programs, because I do have students who say, well, I want to stay another semester and take these extra classes for a certification, or I want to take these extra classes for just, but their requirements are complete. And if a student says, well, I'm just going to take 2 more classes in the spring, even though my requirements are complete, so I can carry this on till June, it's a kind of an ethical slippery slope to say, well, you're done your requirements, but you're going to stay and take classes. I don't know if that's okay or not. And then the second part of this is with doctoral students, especially, you know, I regularly receive requests for extensions of date, even though they've completed all of the requirements, but they say, well, I'm still doing research. You know, I haven't completed all the work yet. And now I'm on my 30th dissertation credit, but I'm not done yet. And that is sort of an easy way to continue to carry this out. So I'm wondering if there's any guidance about that, and you know, what the expectation of the school is versus your office is to say, hey, you're done and you need to be done. I'm just wondering how that plays out.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think in most cases, when we work with academic departments, we do defer to them in order for them to confirm with us when the student has completed everything, because we're not experts on that and we're not sure. And of course, there are some doctoral students who may need extra time for research, depending on what it is that they're completing. You know, if it's a dissertation requirement and they still have not completed their research, then that is a valid reason to extend their degree program. But if there's a master's student who wants to just get extra credits for a certification, then I would likely say that that is not okay, because it's not in the spirit of the regulations. Once they are complete with their actual degree requirements, they need to be complete with the program. So if you ever have any concerns about this, or anybody on this workshop has any concerns, please reach out to us and we can advise on a case-by-case basis. But in general, we do defer to the academic departments to make that call, because again, we're not experts and we don't know exactly what's required for those degree programs.
I think though too, going back to, that's a great answer, Audrey, thank you. But going back to Matt's initial question too about, you know, can we provide like a list or something for the academic department? I think that maybe the most efficient way to do that is that, you know, maybe at the beginning or the midpoint of the semester, when you're anticipating certain students are graduating or how many students are in your program, you can send us like an Excel spreadsheet or something that has the student's name and RUID or their net IDs, whatever we can use to search those students. And then we can cross-check that with our database. So we have our database of all F1, J1 students, and we can plug in all those RUIDs or all those net IDs at the same time, and then it will bring up which ones are F1 and J1. So then we can get back to you and say, here's all the students who are international, you know, also in your program. You can also talk to the registrar if you're not sure, because they can also help by they've got access to all that immigration coding as well. And so that's another route. I mean, we're happy to help because we have the liaisons in our office who can do that, but the registrar also has the more comprehensive information about students' records. And so if you have a contact in the registrar's office, you may also be able to go to them and they might be able to help you even faster than us with finding that information.
Yes, I do that with Blaustein. They'll send me an Excel sheet at the beginning of the semester and I'll cross-check to see who's F1 or J1. And I can also help them to check who has checked in, because like we mentioned, the check-in process is really important. So sometimes they want to know which of their students has checked in, not only just to meet our requirements, but to know like, where is the student? Are they actually coming? Because as you know, students will receive I-20s from multiple schools and they may only, you know, they only choose one. So you may have a longer list of students that you're anticipating potentially coming. And if you need assistance knowing who's actually here, you can also reach out to us regarding that. We can double check for you.
I'll also say,
sorry.
Is that Carissa?
Yeah, I was just going to mention one thing. Sorry.
I was hoping you would. Okay.
Well, one, just to compare, to use this case study for J's. So, I mean, I'll mention it because I know there's small population, but unlike F1 students, a J1 student that is looking to work and pursue academic training, we actually extend their program for their academic training. So you know, we say that it should not expire. Their DS-119 should actually not expire while they're in the program, but when they actually are approved and move on to work on academic training, we actually do extend them. So that is just one difference between, you know, F and J's. And then I'll just share that we know anecdotally from students that sometimes they want to extend based on like a job market, or, they missed a less, especially if they're looking for, higher ed work and postdoc work. But like Audrey had said, and we're saying, it's really not the reason, an academic reason to extend. So we do often talk to students about finding, an option, plan B, if they're looking to work on campus in their field and can do research for their professor that's, of a level of someone that's graduated, then sometimes they explore those opportunities. But academically, they need to extend only if there's an academic or medical reason. So.
And I wanted to add, and for Carissa in particular, because we talked about like non-degree. So Matt, you talked about like certificates, right? And it's a bit complex, so we won't go into detail now about it, but I will say there are certain scenarios where a student can continue with an I-20 for a certificate or non-degree program. I know SMLR has a few graduate level certificates. It's something that I know the answer, it depends, is frustrating, but it really depends on the scenario. So that's why these partnerships are so critical. And, to make sure we have an understanding of what is academically expected of the student. Where are they within this? How does that compare to a domestic student's standing if they were in the same situation? Where's the equity there? And then what regulations dictate what the student can or can't do in continuing? We are not here to penalize a student for something, but we need to make sure they're compliant with the regulations. And, the main takeaway from this is, right, it is case by case, and there should be an academic necessity for a student to stay on longer in their program, to make sure, as the regulation very succinctly says, they're making normal academic progress. What is that? That's where we, institutional policy comes into play, and ethics, like you're saying, right? So there's a lot of complex pieces to that. And, you probably know better than anyone going to so many of these trainings with us that you see this time and time again. But we really do appreciate hearing case by case situations to make sure we are fully understanding what's possible for that student. So yeah, we always say our favorite color is gray because that's what we work in all the time. So it depends, but that doesn't mean no, right? It means let's figure out how to find a path forward. And sometimes we do, unfortunately, have to say no, but we'll explore every possibility first before we reach that to make sure it's fair and it's been really thought out. So.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to add one last thing that I kind of skipped over. One of the answers said something along the lines of they can work while they're waiting for the OPT, like while it's pending. That's actually not true. If a student, like we see a lot of students where they're maybe in a CPT or a campus job and they want to continue it on OPT, so they apply for the OPT and then they need to wait for the EAD card. So there can be gaps in employment, and we do make the student aware of this when they apply based on their timeline. The time in which the OPT is pending varies depending on if they do standard processing or premium processing. So we kind of have that conversation with the student as they're applying, but we are making them aware that unless they have the EAD card in their hand physically, they should not start any employment. So there can be gaps in employment between a CPT and an on-campus to the OPT. And we try to let them know, if you don't know, like if you can't remember anything, remember the card needs to be in your hand. You can't just have the approval notice. You need the card with a valid start date that's not in the future. So if they get a card that says they can start December 1st and it's November 20th, they still can't start until the date is current on their EAD card. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. Like I said, we have these conversations with students, but if you're ever in a situation where a student might be pushing to try and start to work early, just know that this is really important that they have the card physically in their hand. So does anybody have any additional questions related to this specific case study before we wrap up this workshop? I think we went into great detail, so yeah. Okay, so I think we're ready to continue to the next part. Okay, so best practices from your colleagues. So when working with international students, I'm sure you're aware that their needs can be quite different from our domestic students. And so Now that we've wrapped up the case studies, we would like to share some tips and changes that we've made in the last few years. So we have adjusted some of our workspaces to accommodate COVID-related needs and thought about whether our offices can be more accessible to some of our students. So that's based on their ability and their needs. So for example, we now have a location on the ground floor where we can meet with students for and we have virtual appointments that are popular via Zoom. So a lot of our advising is actually remote these days, but we do still have our office and we do welcome students to come see us in person. We love that. But unfortunately, our walk-in advising is now called QQA, quick question advising, and that's all remote. So we also have closed captioning for our workshops, which addresses different needs related to language comprehension and physical or learning abilities. And then thanks to the marketing and communications team, the Rutgers Global YouTube channel is continually expanding with videos featuring global staff as well as international students, covering topics that range in identity biases and how to cook traditional dishes from certain cuisines. So I know we shared some of our videos that the communications team has put together for us, and I really encourage you to check them out. The YouTube channel is great. So communication, as you all know, can be extra hard, and particularly in a virtual environment. So recognizing that our students come from diverse backgrounds and confirming your intended message by email or over the phone and using a variety of language and media can help better relay your message. I find sometimes I need to reword what I'm saying to students in order to make sure that they truly understand what I'm saying, especially in terms of immigration advising, because that can be complicated. So don't forget that Rutgers has its own language and acronyms, and not everybody will know what you're talking about. You may have to spell things out. So I know that if you have SAS students, you may assume they should know what SAS means, but you may have to say School of Arts and Sciences. Sometimes we just have to spell it out and just understand that they may not know all the acronyms. So especially during these challenging times when there's global conflict and many of our students may have an even greater need for support and understanding, remember that those extra steps can make a world of a difference to a student. And so I just want to open up the floor now to see if anybody would like to share your ideas on some of the best practices or your experiences with advising international students specifically, and if you have anything that may be helpful to some of the colleagues here on this call today. So feel free to unmute if you'd like to share a story or a tip, anything that you've learned in your experience. Our staff can also chime in if you'd like.
I'm surprised no one's saying we have so many experienced people.
Tips or anything that maybe was a struggle.
Well, yes, I've been talking a lot because that's what I do. But one of the things that I would suggest is, the challenges I run into a lot are the questions from our faculty. So I've been putting together sort of a brief FAQ, typically like I do to ISS. They just say, Matt, I read these things, but I need you to fix this for me. And that's when I say, ISS, please fix this for me, because I don't know. But a brief overview for faculty to get a general idea of what is and is not okay is very helpful, especially with the OPT, CPT stuff, because they want to give those students those opportunities, but they need to know the rules.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And, I'll just mention, I think you're bringing up a good point. Faculty also mean well to help and advise and connect students with jobs, but just like it's their job to teach, it's also our job to advise and guide students on what the regulations are. And that's where we look for you all to help in partnership, to guide them to our office and also guide them to the resources that we have. That's kind of why we go through the case studies. We don't want you to have to know all the regulations and all of the rules because A, that's not possible. And, B, it's not your job. So, I think that, and we tell students a lot, it's your job to ask the question and to know who to ask the question to, so that if you do get a job opportunity, your professor might say, oh, this is great, you should do this. They have to then say, thank you for sharing, that's great, but I got to talk to ISSS to know if I can, do this opportunity. So I think that's they always have the harder part to kind of fit themselves in these different pieces that they're working with, but it is truly their responsibility. And it's our responsibility to make sure they know the rules and we explain it to them. So I hope that helps a little bit to share the burden for everyone.
And thanks, Carissa. And speaking about students' responsibility too, I want to address something that I think came up very, very briefly in the first half of the workshop, but I want to reiterate it too, because someone reached out in direct message in the chat asking about this. So this is the time of the year too, where, I mean, I'm even starting to get questions that departments are passing along to me from students who are applying for next year, and they're asking about fee waivers for the application fee, or they're giving these really long, narratives about how hard it is in their home country and that they can't even afford the application fee, and how can the university help them. So I just want to make it clear about what the funding expectations are for international students, so that at least departments, or if you're in touch with any of the students, you can at least be aware, not that you need to make any decisions for them about whether they're eligible or not, but that you can be aware of how it works. Carissa had mentioned in her first part of the workshop that F1 students are personally funded, meaning that they need to show evidence of personal funds. It could be their bank account, it could be their parents' bank account, it could be a combination of mom, dad, and an auntie, whoever seems like a legitimate source of funding for the student. And so when the student applies to Rutgers and they work through admissions issues that initial I-20 for new students. They issue the I-20 only after the student has provided evidence of their funding so that they can be eligible for the F1. Because basically when the I-20 is issued, the student has to go to the Department of State and ask for, apply for the F1 visa. And if the Department of State thinks that they don't have the adequate funding, they're not going to give them a visa. The issue is that students can't just, show funding and then come here and then say, well, I can't afford to pay tuition now. I need a job to survive, because nobody wants to see that. That's bad, international relations for us to welcome students who can't support themselves when they're here. And we can't, unless it's a scholarship or a TA-ship, we can't promise support throughout their time. And so I just want to be clear to everyone that, students show that funding as evidence that they can't support themselves. And that's expected from the time that they're admitted to the university. And correct, Steph, up in the chat. We only ask for the proof of the 1-year funds. That's all the government requires, but the student needs to have a plan, because bringing them here and having an uphill battle financially is not good for anybody, obviously.
I'm seeing a lot of questions about admissions. I will say we can't speak to their policies. We work very closely with the admissions offices. But when it comes to the cost for application or the specific requirements for their international applicants, we wouldn't be able to give the specifics, but we do have the contact details, I think, that we might be able to share in here. For scholarships and things like that, right? We don't have insight to how those are determined, but we do work closely with admissions because they're the ones that are processing the I-20s at the end of the day for our students before they become a continuing student working with our office. So I don't know, Maya, if you have another thought to add to that, but just usually we defer to them for the expertise on how that's being evaluated for the international applicants. But it is true. It is to just add to that, it is a federal regulation that the students can afford their time here. That it's not just a Rutgers policy or ethical, it's the law that they need to be able to, have a financial stability while studying, and situations certainly change, but it is something that can impact their immigration status when they're here. They may not be able to continue having an active I-20 or DS 2019 if they're unable to afford the rest of their education, and might have to depart the United States in those situations, which is sad. We try to find ways to avoid that and be prepared. So I think a lot of schools are thinking about the financial literacy piece of things for international students as well, to be prepared, not just for that first year funding, but for the entirety of their degree, and not relying on a funding source that hasn't been promised to them, that hasn't been confirmed.
Right. And just to be clear too, students can enroll from outside the US. There's nothing stopping them from enrolling in an online program from outside the US. It's just that they won't be an international student. They won't have that immigration obligated, like they won't have that Rutgers sponsorship under an F1 or J1 visa. But if a student wants to enroll in a fully online program from outside the US, that's fine. They don't need to, show funding and things like that. They would show the funding and be issued the I-20 only if they plan to come here in the US and be an international student from inside the US.
I just wanted to add, I know we want to hear from the departments too, but I have some really wonderful collaborations that I just want to mention. Maybe other departments get inspired by to do. If you have your own orientation that you host for students, and international students will be there. There's been times I've been invited to join and speak to the international students in particular. That's been really great. Shout out to MBS in particular. That's one that I usually do, Master of Business and Science, and helping plan the timing to not overlap with orientation that we host, so that way they can get the full benefit of attending both sessions. Also, those lists that we talked about. I get wonderful lists from SAS for the undergrads on students that they anticipate won't be graduating, or that will be graduating, or that have some sort of academic situation, so or re-enrolling, right? So getting those lists early and before those deadlines of graduation is really helpful for us to do outreach, Andrew and I, to see, does that student's I-20 expire in the next 30 days? And if yes, do they need to extend? So I love lists like that. And so if there's a way for the departments to think about, how to keep each other informed with our liaisons on doing outreach, that's wonderful. I had another thought there, but I've lost it. But that's just a few of the ways. Lists go far, and don't be afraid to reach out to your liaison, I think is the bottom line. And sometimes, I think it's also to be expected that we will reach out to you, right? Every cycle, there's times where we need to know what the student's plan is. And so don't be surprised if you get an email from an international student liaison asking, hey, do you know what the student's graduation plan is? And we're hoping to hear from you or your department to confirm any insight you have, so we can help the student be guided if they need to extend their I-20 or, plan for OPT in the near future. So I think communication between us is just so critical and so helpful. So thanks for all that are already doing that, which I think everyone is, but communication is great.
Thank you, Steph. I want to call on Jenny Lee because I see she has a hand up, and I recognize it's 12, so we can wrap up, but I don't want to ignore Jenny Lee. Go ahead, please.
Quickly, so we've actually had a lot more of students coming in on scholarships from either their government or from Fulbright scholarships. Is there a direct contact that they should be working with, or just have, reach out to our liaison?
If they're government funded or Fulbright, then they are on a J1. And so they would still be working with our office.
So maybe I could just clarify that one little piece.
Yeah, please. Mm-hmm.
Greg Casales works very closely with the applications for the Fulbright and sponsored students. So he knows who's incoming. I typically advise them and help them. I mean, I can do so prior, so if there is anything, you can always reach out to me. But after they come in and they're accepted, I would be their contact at the ISSS. So if it's Fulbright, as long as they're on a J and they're sponsored Fulbright, then
is there a way that we can get that list of students that applied? Because one of the things that happened last year is we had 2 students that were Fulbright, and then we actually denied them. And we didn't know that they were Fulbright. So we kind of had to do some things because on the application, it's a very, very tiny checkbox. And there's actually no way to pull a report in Salesforce for those students that designate themselves.
Seb's also asked me about this, and I'm like, how do you guys not know? I will.
Unless I go through everyone or a student tells me, I can't even pull a report in Salesforce of those.
It's a little bit ambiguous. I know Greg does know. I think that there is a way that grad admissions on the back end can give us a list of those that are coded. I can ask. But I will say that it is sometimes a challenge for a lot of people at Rutgers to know who's coming, when, or we know like very last minute, or they just show up and I'm like, oh, you were not on my list. So it's fun. Never boring. But yeah, I will definitely see. I'm going to ask Greg about this to see if there's a way where we can kind of disseminate a list or, give you information if needed.
So I think we're getting ready to wrap up. I just wanted to end by saying that a lot of the departments that I liaison for, if they are confused or they get an email from a student where they're unsure, they forward to me and loop me in, and I am totally okay with that. So if an email ever comes across your desk and you're not sure, please reach out to me or to your liaison. We're more than happy to help. And I think that can help, foster the conversations between both the departments, us, and the students at times if we need to loop the student in as well. So just keep that on your radar. And lastly, please let us know if you think of any ways that you'd like us to collaborate with you. Like Steph said, we can come to your orientations and present. If you can think of any other resources that might be helpful from our office to yours, please let us know. We're more than happy to work on that. So now we're at the end. So we're going to come with the last slide here. This is the QR code to our assessment. If you could please take a moment to scan this QR code, respond with your feedback, and then you will be earning your digital badge after that. So we appreciate your time and attention. I know this is a very long workshop with a lot of information, but we really do appreciate you being here, and we hope that this will improve our relationship going forward in supporting the students and supporting you as well. So we'll just give you a second to do that. And then once you've done that, we hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you, Audrey. And I wanted to say thank you to all of our awesome advising staff that's here today. This really was a group effort. I'm trying to shine a light on everybody in our advising team. So we really appreciate everyone's help today. So thank you. And I also want to point out to everyone who's here from the other campus units that we're not all of the ISSS. We obviously have, we've got other folks. We have administrative coordinators, front office coordinators. We have a health insurance coordinator. We have folks who are here as participants today, joining from our office, that are quietly observing and soaking it all in. And so that's great. And we have our illustrious leader, Mohini Mukherjee, who many of you know is our executive director. So it really takes a village, and we have a sizable team of about 21 folks in our office. And we want you to feel free to reach out to any of us anytime you have questions. If you can't reach your liaison, contact anybody else in our office, and we are happy to work with you. So thank you again so much for all of your support, both for us and for our international students today and moving forward. So we all hope you have a great day. Best wishes for the holidays and for the rest of the semester.